Chapter 1441, Scar II. On the other side, Li Xiaowei also faltered slightly. The demonic radiance on his forehead burst apart, revealing a glimpse of pale bone glimmering with prismatic light. Golden white blood surged out, instantly erasing all the demonic energy. Flesh regenerated at once, restoring his skin to a flawless state. This demonic radiance gave Helian Wumeng another chance to breathe. The western subjugation glazed stars, flared brightly, and seized the moment to descend upon the youth opposite him. Li Xiaowei immediately recognized the danger of the treasure. The great void trembled, bright yang surged upward, and the heaven-venerating gate abandoned its target and rose from below, blocking the glazed beads in the sky as thick white smoke billowed. Separated by a great distance, the two finally ceased their attacks at the same time. Buzz! Li Xiaowei flexed an arm as he leveled his halberd at his opponent. Desheng was now trembling continuously, letting out low, mournful hums. Even with surging black flames covering it to prevent direct contact with the spirit artifact, the Dharma artifact still seemed close to its limits. Meanwhile, Helian Wumeng's blood tears continued to fall. He coughed once, and two streaks of golden light burst from his tightly shut eyes before they opened, revealing hollow, charred sockets. The grotesque auxiliary eyes slid upward and settled into the empty hollows, restoring his face to its original handsome appearance from a distance. The fierce clash had left neither with an obvious injury. Only a faint golden-white scar that was already fading remained on Helian Wumeng's face. The sky split along their positions, north and south. On one side, baleful qi churned in endless darkness. On the other, radiant light shimmered amid drifting clouds. For a moment, neither spoke. It was not that a victor had been decided. A hazy golden glow was spreading rapidly from the northwest. One golden form after another appeared behind Helian Wumeng. Their gazes were both greedy and wary as they clasped their hands and lowered their eyes in silence. 4 merciful ones had arrived. Li Xiaowei stood with the great river at his back. Brilliant heavenly light opposed the group of devil monks, yet neither side made a move. One merciful one laughed and glanced at Li Xiaowei, then said softly with clasped hands, "The northern front has succeeded, but Mount Tangdao has yet to be taken. This place is still unsafe. We have been ordered to escort you back to Mount Zhaoxi." Helian Wumeng did not even turn his head. Surprise lingered on his face, along with a faint itch for battle. He continued to stare at Li Xiaowei from afar until a deep voice rang out, "A fine body." Li Xiaowei offered praise as Helian Wumeng continued to stare at him in surprise. He planted the tip of his long-handled blade into the clouds below, then raised a finger and brushed it across the golden-white scar on his face. The color transferred onto his fingertip, which he lifted before his eyes to examine. Good, joy flickered in his eyes as he muttered, "A battle with Minghuang is worth 3 years of bitter cultivation." Even as enemies, the northern man's bearing did not diminish. The wound on his face had faded in color, and the divine ability had been dispelled, yet traces still lingered, lending his features a sharper, more ferocious edge. "I will remember this halberd strike." The two sides faced each other from afar in the sky, their spiritual senses locked onto every movement. After a few breaths, two figures hurried over from the south, riding the wind. They were the same devil cultivators who had crossed the river. Li Xiaowei and Helian Wumeng had fought at incredible speed, forcing the group into a hasty retreat. Only these two managed to escape. The black-robed youth was shrouded in flickering dark light, clearly protected by purple mansion realm talismans. Without them, they would not have fled so easily. The other was covered in burning radiant fire and radiant light. His lower body was gone entirely, and the upper half that remained was wreathed in thick black smoke. In that brief span, only these two had survived among all the cultivators who had crossed the river. Standing above the river, Li Xiaowei calmly glanced down. Helian Wumeng tightened his grip on the long-handled blade, a faint smile in his eyes that needed no explanation. Since the supreme Yang Dao lineage had been defeated, they would likely withdraw. The lineage's foundation was deep, and no one would press them too hard. Meanwhile, Helian Wumeng and the others had advanced too far, and the northern forces were not unified. Fearing encirclement, they had to retreat, and these few had to be taken with them. If fighting broke out again, Helian Wumeng could hold Li Xiaowei in place, and what the other merciful ones might do would be hard to predict. Yet Li Xiaowei merely swept his gaze across them, tightened his grip on the halberd, and said coldly, "You can leave. What is in your stomach stays." The 4 merciful ones all looked eager to act, but Helian Wumeng had no intention of lingering. He laughed loudly, almost amused and enjoying the spectacle, and said only, "Spit it out." The devil cultivator beside the black-robed youth turned pale, and with a retching sound, spat out a heap of flesh. It was immediately bound by heavenly light and gathered into a sphere in midair. Only then did the two cross the river in trembling fear. They hurried beneath Helian Wumeng's cloud, casting anxious glances at Li Xiaowei before looking back at their own superior. Their eyes seemed to be burned when they saw the scar on his face, and they quickly lowered their heads, not daring to look further. Purple Mansion Realm Dharma body could not retain scars. He had clearly chosen to keep it as a reminder. As the devil cultivators fled back across the river, he grabbed the two of them. His baleful chi body dissolved into drifting black mist, leaving behind only a voice echoing in the darkness. There's too many techniques today and it's no fun at all. Next time, when you have a proper weapon, let us fight again. Hellion Wumeng could clearly tell that Li Xiaowei had been constrained. If his weapon had been suitable, he would not have closed in so abruptly and forced the battle to revolve around spell arts. Without that trace of supreme yang energy within heavenly radiance, hidden light, the fight would not have ended so easily. The heavenly light brightened and the darkness receded. The Buddhist cultivators withdrew as well. Li Xiaowei stood among the clouds, quietly watching the distant figures retreat as he thought, Hellion Wumeng, Taifo State. He turned the Dharma artifact in his hand, looking at Da Sheng with a trace of regret. The crescent-shaped branch had bent slightly out of alignment and was shedding faint specks of golden light. Materials for ancient Dharma artifacts are hard to find, at least it has not broken. After a brief look at his artifact, he cast a complicated glance at the pale mist at the horizon. Then he shifted his gaze to the ball of flesh and spoke coldly, "Get out." A head emerged from the flesh, attached only to a torso with no limbs. His features were handsome, but his face was smeared with blood and pale as death. His breath was faint with trembling lips. It was Fei Qingyi on the brink of death. In the battle over the lake with no reinforcements at hand, those devil cultivators had chosen to retreat. Using Purple Mansion Realm talismans to repel their foes, they tricked him into not resisting and swallowed most of Fei Qingyi's body in one gulp. Clearly, they had intended to carry him across the river, whether as nourishment or for some other use, to be handed over to Hellion Wumeng. After being drained of most of his mana and blood chi inside another's body, Fei Qingyi now relied entirely on the tenacious life force of the Foundation Establishment Realm to hold himself together. He looked as if he might dissolve into frost at any moment. His pupils were dilated to the extreme, his lips trembling as he looked at Li Xiaowei, his head hanging low. His consciousness was fading, yet he still knew Li Xiaowei's name. He had even seen him from afar before. It has only been a few years. Li Xiaowei looked at him with a faint smile and blew lightly. A white wind swept forth, pulling limbs from the mass of flesh and planting them onto his body like scallions. Bright yang energy surged, restoring his limbs instantly. Color returned to his face at once. Yet before he could steady himself in the air, the gleaming halberd rose high, reflecting the clouds and golden light of the sky, and pierced straight through his chest. Thud! The halberd lifted him into the air. Fei Qingyi hung upon it like a dead fish, staring upward. Only those cold, dark gold eyes remained in his inverted world. The world spun as pain tore through him, and a single chilling thought lingered in his mind. It would have been better to just die. Chapter 1442, Meeting Again, I. The sky was dim, and figures hurried across Glacial Cloud Peak. Cultivators in white armor carried weapons in hand. At their head, the black-robed youth wore a dark expression that seemed furious, yet the hand resting on his sword lay there with a faint, almost casual ease. At last this day has come. For years, the Fei family had remained semi-independent on the northern bank. Chen Yang had petitioned the peak more than once to strip them of that small measure of autonomy. 5 generations of my Chen family have rendered great merit, yet we have never held land as our descendants run about in service. What even are you, Fei family, latecomers who bent the knee, and you dare to be the son of Diang? Still, Chen Yang felt no ill will for Fei Qingyi's desperate gamble, instead his impress. Ion of the man shifted. Where he had once seemed merely obedient, Chen Yang now found a trace of admiration and shook his head inwardly. Even a cornered rabbit will bite. With better fortune, he might have even succeeded. A pity, truly. In the end, he was devoured by devil cultivators. If it had been me, I would not have charged in so foolishly. The Fei family had always been cautious and had endured. Li Ziming in the Great Ziyuqi Temple had already agreed to relocate the Fei clansmen. Both sides had even begun handing over personnel. Once they reached the more loosely governed Great Ziyuqi Temple, with support from above, life as a landed clan would have been far more comfortable. Yet the Fei family had fallen on the eve of dawn. Now the mountain was filled with wailing and cries. However, to Chen Yang, it sounded like celestial music. His hand stroked the hilt of his sword as he watched the woman being dragged along like a dead dog, a low chuckle rumbling in his throat. You are in for it now. The Fei clansmen on the ground cried out their innocence, but no one paid them any heed. Glacial Cloud Peak was famed for its snowy scenery. Now, the snow shimmered with a dull golden hue under the dusk light. Chen Yang turned away without mercy and stepped outside the courtyard, where 2 pots of plum blossoms still swayed in the wind and snow. A young man in crimson robes stood in the snow, a woman in a feathered robe beside him. His gaze rested on the plum blossoms. Chen Yang bowed deeply and said respectfully, "Young master, all members of the Fei family have been detained and await your judgment." When Li Jianqian did not respond, he added eagerly, "These plum blossoms have grown well, if moved to the island. No need, they still have some vitality here. If moved, they will not survive." Li Jianqian withdrew his gaze and said softly, "This courtyard was once the residence of our forebears. Preserve every inch of it. Not a single thing is to be damaged. As for the Fei family." He stopped mid-sentence. Chen Yang froze, lifting his brow slightly, only to see the entire courtyard grow bright. The once dim snow, now touched by radiant light, gleamed as it began to melt into thin streams of water. Drip! Only then did he notice a drop of red falling before his eyes, dark as blood. The moment it struck the ground, it turned into a wisp of cold air and drifted away. Everyone nearby looked up as one, staring at the blinding radiant light above. The dark clouds in the sky dispersed as colorful clouds gathered. A figure stood above the lake. The setting sun cast a crimson glow over him, too bright to look at directly, leaving only a silhouette that appeared even darker against the blazing light. A familiar halberd hung high in the air. A man in white was draped across it like a corpse, stark and unmistakable. Blood flowed down his robes like a stream, dripping off and turning into flakes of white snow. "Father, greetings, Taoist master." The courtyard filled with the sound of kneeling. Chen Yang felt thunder crash through his mind, leaving it blank but for a single thought, not Taoist master Zheajing. He succeeded. The Li family now has a second purple mansion realm cultivator. The thought vanished as quickly as it came. In the next instant, he realized who the man in white was. Fei Qingyi, he has been brought back. Thud. The halberd tilted downward and the man in white tumbled to the ground. He groaned, dragged his broken body up, and began knocking his head against the ground. No one in the courtyard dared to speak, only the dull thudding echoed. Li Jianqian showed no surprise, clearly having already seen Li Xiaowei. With a flick of his sleeve, he turned and bowed in another direction, saying respectfully, "Congratulations, my lord, on attaining divine ability." At once everyone bowed again in unison. The Taoist master in the sky had already vanished, leaving behind only a calm instruction. "Settle matters here, then come to the island to see me." Radiant light receded, and everything returned to the muted red-black of dusk. Before anyone could recover from their shock, Chen Yang lunged forward and shouted, "Fei Qingyi has fallen into demonic ways. The Fei family colluded with the northern monks, inviting disaster into Jiangnan. Their crimes are unforgivable. The Taoist master turned the tide, yet Fei Qingyi caused countless deaths on the northern bank. He should be paraded for 3 days, then executed and his head displayed." Li Jianqian waited until he had spoken loudly enough for all the cultivators and the Fei family present to hear. Voices rose at once across the courtyard. Only then did he raise a hand and say, "That would be too lenient. Gather the men first and keep everyone under watch." The crowd reported and withdrew, whispering among themselves. Li Jianqian frowned slightly and said quietly, "The Fei family caused heavy casualties. Among the people of the northern bank, they cannot be spared, but Fei Qingyi is still at the great Ziyuqui temple. How should we deal with her?" Li Qiuan understood at once. The joy in her eyes faded, replaced by a cold glint as she replied softly, "It is not difficult. Fei Qingyi has little attachment to the Fei family. A letter will suffice. She's the sort who sees right and wrong in stark terms, and the great Ziyuqui temple will not object. This is a critical time. We cannot be lenient. Wiping out the entire clan may be excessive, but exterminating 3 generations of Fei Qingyi's line would be justified. Fei Qingyi is beyond our reach. As for the rest, there is no need to leave survivors." Li Jianqian nodded, not entirely satisfied. The Fei family had a large population. Though many of their commoners had died in the recent battle, uprooting them entirely would still mean tens of thousands of deaths. He considered for a moment and said, "Fei Qingyi still holds a post at Mount Tangdao, which is nominally under the great Ziyuqui temple. Bind his 3 generations and let the supreme Yang Dao lineage handle it. As for the others, deal with them according to the situation." Fei Qingyi now belonged to the Si family. Having defected, she could not interfere. Even if she felt sympathy, she had no right to speak. It was not like she had not warned the Fei family, but what could she do now? With the matter settled, they issued their orders and soon departed. The cries of grief gradually faded. Glacial Cloud Peak was left empty, with only falling snow drifting through the night, settling softly upon the sealed halls. The pavilion high above stood in quiet stillness amid the wind. The white paint on its doors had dulled slightly as snow fell in soft, broken sounds. 2 winter plum trees bloomed quietly in the snow, as if nothing had ever changed. Chapter 1443, Meeting Again, II. Zhaijing Mountain. Li Xiaowei descended on a streak of light. The climate here was utterly different from the cold desolation of Glacial Cloud Peak. Bright light blazed, and gardenia flowers spread in rolling waves, giving the place a vibrant, heated atmosphere. The man in white golden Taoist robes paced anxiously beside the table. When he saw Li Xiaowei enter, a smile appeared in his eyes. He seemed relieved, yet a trace of worry remained. Li Xiaowei brought his hands together in greeting. "My lord." Li Ziming picked up the teapot. The fatigue on his face, brought on by his injuries, eased somewhat. Although he had managed to retrieve his damaged body from Hellion Wuzheng in time, baleful qi still churned within him. His injuries from a clash with a Taoist master possessing 3 divine abilities were clearly far from light. "When I go to Mount Tangdao, I must get some medicine from them. I really risked my life this time." His return from the north had truly shaken him. He had sensed Hellion Wumeng stationed at White River Stream from afar. If the man had truly moved south to slaughter, it would have been risky for Li Ziming to intervene. But Li Xiaowei's appearance had allowed him to relax and observe silently through the great void before returning ahead of time. He now asked, "When did you return?" Li Xiaowei loosened his grip and Da Sheng vanished. He bowed deeply, stepped to the table, accepted the tea Li Ziming poured, and replied respectfully. The timing was actually quite ample, but the phenomenon was concealed and cut off by the Dragon Clan, and the stone talisman I left for you lost its effect, so no one knew. After breaking through, I made a trip to the Dragon Palace. By the time I returned, several days had already passed. I then saw Mount Zioshi collapse, and the situation only worsened, threatening the lakeshore. I stationed myself on the northern bank. I ask that you forgive me for not going to Timber Mountain to assist. "That is nothing." Li Ziming let out a short laugh, set down the jade teapot, and said seriously, "I knew you would succeed, but I did not expect it to be so soon. It seems that fate truly favors you in ways others can only envy." Under normal circumstances, Li Ziming would have been overjoyed and eager to hold a grand banquet to celebrate for 3 days. But the situation was far from clear, and his injuries were not light. A shadow lay over his joy, and worry returned before long. He sighed, the smile fading as he said softly, "I cannot control this situation. I can only go along with the tide. I have already drawn too close to the supreme Yang Dao lineage. From what I see now, this conflict between North and South is entirely different from past years. Kueki has treated me well. I can no longer withdraw so easily. I returned in haste to save people and happened to meet you. I had planned to head to Mount Tangdao." Li Xiaowei shook his head, about to speak further, but Li Ziming continued, "You need not go with me. At a time like this, everyone is looking out for themselves. You can play the moderate role and remain at home. If we're both too agreeable, there will be things we cannot refuse." Li Xiaowei naturally understood this, though his expression grew slightly complicated as he replied, "I made a trip to the Dragon Palace, and the timing of my departure and return happened to fall right here." Their words were full of hints, but the meaning was simple enough. They did not want me involved in the great battle of Lower Luo. It seems all sides had long since reached an understanding about how this war would end. Li Ziming felt his heart tighten at those words and asked, "What else did the Dragon Clan say?" Li Xiaowei first fell silent and shook his head before answering. "Ding Jiao is in seclusion. He only left something for me in the Dragon Palace within the Water Mansion and instructed me to take it away no matter what. It was another white dragon who met with me, and we only exchanged a few words." He raised a hand and took a jade box from his sleeve. When he opened the lid, it revealed 2 bright little rings. Spirit treasures, the dry yang bangles. Since Li Xiaowei had dared to face Hellion Wumeng and 4 merciful ones above the river, he naturally had a trump card. Li Ziming had once used the Surging Yang Star Command treasure disc, so he knew full well how formidable such treasures were. His eyes lit up at once, and he asked in startled delight, "Spirit treasures, they gave them to you?" Li Xiaowei looked a little awkward as he replied, "That is right. I could not refuse. They were worried about troubles at home, which is why they specifically gave me the dry yang bangles, so I brought them back." These 2 spirit treasures did not look especially remarkable. At first glance, they seemed to be nothing more than a pair of golden rings, sized just right to be worn on the wrist. But upon closer inspection, a faint white gold glow flickered across them, appearing and vanishing. Li Ziming examined them carefully. In the end, he closed the box again, returned it to Li Xiaowei, and instructed him, "With this in your hands, you will have more protection, and I can rest easier with you guarding the lake. I still need to make another trip." As he spoke, he took out a jade slip and a command token from his sleeve and said quietly, "The family's grand formation was completed during the years you were in seclusion. This command token will allow you to enter and leave both the inner and outer formations." This jade slip contains the experience I have gained these past few years while struggling to cultivate the heaven-venerating gate. Read it, then destroy it." He sorted through his storage pouch and immediately pulled out a whole pile of items. Pills, cultivation methods, spiritual chi, dharma artifacts. All of it was pressed into Li Xiaowei's hands. The sight of it was so inauspicious that Li Xiaowei's eyelids twitched. After leaving the items behind, Li Ziming rose on a streak of light and fled into the great void, vanishing from sight. Li Xiaowei remained behind, taking in the things he had been given. He stared at the jade box on the table, silently sipped his tea, and his expression gradually darkened. "You're all pieces on the board, but what family is not? Those who refuse to be pieces, who refuse to bow their heads and serve like beasts of burden. How many are not carved up and bled dry, stripped to the bone? Even Purple Mansion realm cultivators have their own burdens and constraints. Only by hardening one's heart, abandoning everything in one stroke, and fleeing to the outer sea can one preserve a few hundred years of freedom. As long as one still seeks to climb higher in this world, one cannot escape serving another's will. As for me, I am afraid I do not even have the right to leave their sight." A trace of mocking laughter touched his face. Lowering his head, he picked up the jade slip in his hand and sent his spiritual sense into it. He read through it carefully. As expected, it was mostly discussion on the bright Yang Dao. Yet when he read all the way to the end in one breath, he found that it unexpectedly contained an incantation as well. Li Xiaowei glanced at it once and his heart was shaken, yet his expression remained calm as he crushed the jade slip in his hand. Light flashed in his eyes as he raised his head and said coldly, "Who is it?" The great void rang out, and two figures suddenly emerged onto Zhaijing Mountain. One of them was short, with horns on his forehead, an ugly face and eyes set wide apart. He held a long brush like a pounding pestle. The moment he appeared, he bowed and said, "Dispatched from the underworld's judiciary, Wang Long greets you, fellow Taoist. Congratulations on attaining divine ability. From this day on, your fate is your own, beyond life and death." The other held a large tome. Zhang Gui had been here before. Both wore expressions of delight there, eyes bright with excitement as they looked at him. Li Xiaowei had long heard of them from Li Ziming and shook his head inwardly. "They don't dare say anything about helping me escape the great calamity and attain fruition first, only then becoming true." Wang Long, unaware of his thoughts, said with a smile, "Forgive the intrusion, fellow Taoist. We have been here before, but we did not expect to return so soon. You truly possess heaven-given talent. Few have broken through to the Purple Mansion realm within 10 years since ancient times. Now we have seen it for ourselves. The last time we were here, the last time. The time it took to break through to Purple Mansion realm inevitably involved some luck." Wang Long was simply offering auspicious words. Zhang Gui slowly took over the conversation and said, "The last time was Jiang Boking, a man of very high attainment." "Yes, indeed." Zhang Gui studied his expression carefully and added with delight, "Even the higher authorities praised him, saying he was talent beyond convention, a fate fit to bear mountains. They held him in high regard. If not for his intervention, how would that Jiang have had any room to act? He would have long since been." He seemed to have spoken too freely and suddenly cut himself off, then forced a smile. "You must be a truly outstanding figure, one who will achieve the 5 divine abilities." Li Xiaowei caught the implication behind the words. Light flickered in his eyes as his fingers brushed lightly against the jade cup. He committed it to memory and replied with a smile, "After breaking through to the Purple Mansion realm, I hurried back home in haste and forgot that the two of you would come to register my name. I have kept you waiting for so long. My apologies." Chapter 1444, Illuminating Sun and Moon, I. "Not at all, not at all." The two exchanged a glance and quickly cupped their fists in greeting. Wang Long simply said, "Fellow Taoist, you are too modest. When you were born, auspicious clouds drifted like a canopy, white cicadas covered the ground, and Qilin bore the child. We all received orders. Judge Yang sent the two of us to the corresponding location in the underworld. One of us sounded the conch, the other stirred the winds. Then we rose from the shiki and rang the morning mist bell for 3/4 of an hour. It was all done according to ancient rites to celebrate your birth. We always knew this day would come, so waiting a little while means nothing." Li Xiaowei naturally knew that nothing about him had ever been hidden from the moment he was born. Perhaps some Purple Mansion realm cultivators in a distant coastal or northern region might not know, but when it came to those figures above the heavens, playing their game and holding the seas within their grasp, how could they fail to see the board? Of course they knew everything clearly. Taking the opportunity, he asked, "I've troubled you, fellow Taoist. The world is vast. In this age there are countless people with such signs. You praise me too highly." "That is not correct." Wang Long shook his head and replied, "You possess more than a single destiny. Your nobility lies in being a descendant of the Golden Core, and that noble lineage matches your fate, making it all the more exalted. There are many gifted individuals in this world who are fate bearers, but once they break through to the Purple Mansion realm, their fate divine ability can be cultivated by others as well. What they are born with can be learned by others. Even if there are some peculiarities, it is hard to say they surpass other divine abilities by much. I have heard of the affairs of the world, setting aside reincarnation and innate talents such as the sword path. If we speak only of fate and bloodline, aside from that one of the Chuoba family, anyone who can compare to you has only just been born. Moreover, he hesitated slightly as if weighing whether he should continue. After another glance, he finally said, I believe you understand your own identity. You can determine in full view of all the future of those with great destiny and great divine ability. Who could say your destiny is not vast? Is that not itself a kind of divine ability? Naturally, it gives rise to all manner of wonders. And when a domineering fruition attainment like Bright Yang no longer favors a single person alone, an exception like you, does that not deserve to be called a destiny beyond measure? Li Xiaowei's situation was part of a game among the heavens. What the Dragon Clan knew, the underworld's judiciary would not know any less. The two before him were courteous, and Zhang Gui said in a simple, earnest tone, your fate aligns with Bright Yang, and your bloodline descends from the Wei Emperor. In ancient times, you would surely have been called a Dao body. But he was not good with words and stopped abruptly. His companion immediately picked up the thread. In the past, the Dao bodies of the Wei state all had different names, and they were always quite long. Emperor Wu, for instance, was called the Heaven-Exalted Radiant Light, 10 Directions Revered Imperial Body. It's nothing unusual. Haha, emperors of the Celestial Dynasty always cared about such things. Li Xiaowei fell into thought. The two emissaries of the underworld's judiciary did not seem to have much time. Wang Long nodded repeatedly and moved straight to the main matter, cupping his hands in greeting. Though we are already familiar with your great name, the formalities must still be observed. He straightened his posture and asked with a solemn air, what is your name? Li Xiaowei nodded and replied, I am Xiaowei of the Li family, Zhou as in renewal, Wei as in towering. As his words rang out, ink began to gather in the large brush in Wang Long's hand. Zhang Gui, standing to the side, said, do we still need to look it up? His pink lips moved as he started flipping through the thick book in his hands. Wang Long urged him impatiently, what's there to look for? Just write it. Clearly, not only Li Ziming, but even Li Xiaowei would likely not have their names recorded in the book. Wang Long had served in the mortal branch of the underworld's judiciary for years. How could he not know this? He grumbled inwardly, no wonder he's been an errand runner longer than I have. With such poor judgment, how could he ever be promoted? Li Ziming's name can't even be found anymore. Who knows who's doing that is? Li Xiaowei is clearly even more important, a major piece in the world's shifting game. It would be strange if his name were recorded at all. The two fussed about for quite a while before finally putting brush to paper. After listening, Li Xiaowei brushed his hand over the storage pouch at his waist and took out a jade box, only to see Wang Long smile and say, that won't do, that won't do. Ordinary gifts could be accepted, but this one he could not. He pushed the jade box back, still wearing an awkward smile, and said, how could we possibly take something from you, fellow Taoist? If not for the rules, the two of us should be the ones offering you gifts. After all, matters of great figures are not for us to discuss. In the future, when you have the chance to break through to the Golden Core realm, if it does not interfere with greater affairs, you may choose any place in this region as you wish. Perhaps consider selecting somewhere closer to the area under our jurisdiction. So they are after metallic essence. Li Xiaowei understood and gave a slight nod. Wang Long waved his hands repeatedly, disclaiming responsibility as he said, do not let this delay the matters above. If it is inconvenient, that is fine. We will have many chances to meet in the future. If we could just have the chance to witness your divine ability and see your future achievements, that would be more than enough. Even the slow-moving Zhang Gui put on a flattering smile. He set down the large book and said respectfully, this can certainly be discussed. We only fear we may be too presumptuous. For now, we still have matters to handle in the north, so we will not trouble you further. The two exchanged a few more words with smiles, then transformed into two gusts of yin wind and dispersed. It seems the methods of the underworld's judiciary are no less formidable. Yang Tianya achieved divine ability even earlier than Hufu, yet no one knows his current cultivation. He had stayed hidden behind the scenes. The north and south have fought to such a state, and yet the entire Yang family appears harmless, without a single move from him. Compared to the faintly domineering force in the north, with its iron control over the entire world's situation, the methods of the underworld's judiciary were far more subtle, working unseen like moisture soaking into things. If the Li family had not been informed early about Yang Tianya, they might still regard the Yang family as nothing more than a group of fallen royals secluded in the mountains. But on closer thought, the key connection between the Yang family and the Li family lay in the marriage of Li Zijia. Could it be seen as the Yang family placing an early bet on the Li family? If so, what other arrangements had Yang Tianya made? As a mixed bloodline of the Yang and Li families, what role does Zhuliuo's lineage play under the Azure Pond sect? Li Xiaowei pondered for quite some time, then shook his head and stopped thinking about it. After confirming the two had truly left, his figure transformed into light and vanished. There was no time to visit anyone. He stepped through the great void and descended toward the lake. He flew into the grand formation, passed through rows of towering profound pillars, and entered the inner hall. There, in the dim hall, stood a single pagoda. It was the glazed pagoda of unrestrained boundary. He stepped head onto the top of the pagoda, sat cross-legged, and closed his eyes as he silently recited an incantation. I, Xiaowei of the Li family, ascend through divine ability, seeking perfection in virtue. I pray to rise within the mandate of heaven, to be inscribed upon the profound register, to open the profound clarity and continue the Tao. Dong! A faint sense of weightlessness came at once. He felt the white orb within his Shenyang mansion tremble, and his body seemed to shrink instantly. Before his eyes, a misty, cloud-filled world appeared, and a chill spread across the back of his head. Chapter 1445, Illuminating Sun and Moon, II. In the next moment, everything brightened as he found himself inside a pavilion. Gray stone and white jade surrounded him, bathed in clear lamplight. Li Xiaowei lifted his head slightly, the sun and moon shining together reflected in his pupils. When he felt the dense spiritual qi rushing toward him, his heart trembled, such dense spiritual energy, and so perfectly balanced. This is a world within the mirror. Only then did Li Ziming's earlier meaningful expression come to mind. Joy surged within him, followed by a sudden realization. No wonder he can fight battle after battle and still cultivate his divine ability so quickly. With a world like this at his disposal, how could he ever fall behind in cultivation? Li Xiaowei looked around, deeply satisfied, and quietly let out a breath of relief. Many of the risky items at home can all be moved here. He looked upward. A small jade bottle sat on the desk, and at the center of the pavilion hung a painting of soaring white sparrows. He did not need to use his spiritual sense to discern that it was a cultivation method. He stepped forward quickly. With a sweep of his golden gaze, he took the jade bottle into his hand. The jade bottle had a slightly long neck and a pristine white body. The moment Li Xiaowei held it, he saw layers of faint azure mist swirling inside, rising and falling. He froze for a moment, a purple mansion realm green talisman. The talisman seed within his Shenyang mansion stirred violently, like the morning sun breaking through clouds. Amid layers of bright yang divine ability, they rose and turned into a streak of white light. The tightly sealed azure mist within the bottle seemed to respond to a call. Threads of it, wisp by wisp, leaped out, then surged forth like a bursting flood. It transformed into all kinds of phenomena, and guided by the white light at the center of his eyebrows, poured entirely into his Shenyang mansion. Li Xiaowei was both shocked and delighted. He immediately sat cross-legged. A cool clarity spread through his Shenyang mansion, and the heaven-venerating gate within him stirred as if drinking sweet nectar. His cultivation surged. The bright white heavenly gate within his Shenyang mansion manifested at once. Lines of white patterns shone brilliantly, growing more intricate by the moment. The 72 ridges along its eaves lit up, stretching outward and extending further. The azure radiance surged within his Shenyang mansion, forming a powerful pull at its center. The brilliance of sun and moon at the heart of this world, mixed with spiritual energy, poured wildly into his body. Yet this spiritual energy remained perfectly balanced, not a trace more or less. No matter how much he absorbed, it did not diminish in the slightest, as if it were boundless and inexhaustible. As the spiritual energy gathered rapidly, it fused with the azure radiance into divine ability mana and poured toward the heavenly gate. In less than a quarter of an hour, this heaven-venerating gates had reached perfection. Green talisman was the very essence of an entire purple mansion realm, and refining his divine ability had not fully exhausted this talisman. However, the azure radiance within his Shenyang mansion had not stopped. It continued to surge toward the divine ability in waves, but with the heaven-venerating gate already complete, the energy had nowhere to go. It could only accumulate, drifting back and forth within the white light. At that moment, the true form of the talisman seeds emerged from the base of the Shenyang mansion. The azure radiance responded as if summoned, gathering below the dantian and condensing into a long, narrow green talisman. It appeared somewhat dim, floating gently as it settled above the heaven-venerating gate. With a touch of his spiritual sense, Li Xiaowei knew that with a single thought, this talisman could transform back into azure radiance mana and continue raising his cultivation. Once I cultivate the next divine ability, I can use this remaining azure radiance. A flicker of joy passed through him, but he did not linger on it. The center of Li Xiaowei's eyebrows shone like a star radiating golden light. Like an old monk in meditation, his mind sank into darkness, then light emerged. Strokes of white and gold appeared, intertwining and shifting in constant transformation, illuminating sun and moon. This talisman could sweep away demonic obstacles, carry forward one's legacy in peace, and unleash the might of bright yang. It gathered and bound destiny, anchoring one's life within a single mansion. Each time one fought to the death, breaking through divine abilities and defeating demonic forces, one resonated with life itself. In harmony with the sun, moon, and heaven and earth, it could draw forth the mana of the Shenyang mansion and grant an increment of Dao practice. Dao practice, it can be increased like this. This was completely different from Li Zizhai's Rainbow Pierce Skyway. Li Zizhai's Rainbow Pierce Skyway relied on one's noble status to gradually strengthen their techniques over time. While it aided the growth of Dao practice, it did not directly increase it. Dao practice was an ancient and profound matter. It stemmed from one's understanding of divine abilities, Dao lineage, and inheritance. Those from major sect lineages, or with longer cultivation, often possessed deeper Dao practice and were correspondingly stronger in battle. Dao practice was closely tied to the profundity of techniques, each reinforcing the other. Yet Dao practice often encountered bottlenecks. Learning techniques could improve it at first, but without acquiring increasingly refined arts and dedicating time to study, it would not continue to grow. Even so, any increase in Dao practice enhanced technique use, divine ability execution, and even cultivation speed. This talisman meant that after a fierce battle and defeating a sufficiently powerful opponent, Li Xiaowei's Dao practice could improve more than what others might achieve in years of study, and its benefits were not limited to combat. Once accumulated to a certain level, whether it was the heaven-venerating gate or the dry yang bangles, both would display entirely new brilliance in his hands. His understanding of generative force, the harmonization of bright yang, and the transformations of divine ability would deepen as well. It would even greatly aid his attempt at fruition attainment and his breakthrough to the Golden Core realm. And anchoring one's life within a single mansion had even greater applications. Li Xiaowei carried destiny within him and was often regarded as possessing the bloodline of the Wei Emperor. His Dharma body had always been superior. Since breaking through to the Purple Mansion realm, he had gained a vague but profound realization. Although he had not cultivated any body divine abilities, the strength of his Dharma body now far surpassed that of Li Ziming, who had also perfected the heaven-venerating gate. The white blood within him could suppress malevolent forces. It was difficult for Devil Dao Mana in particular to linger on him and was expelled more quickly. Yet just as more refined techniques are harder to cultivate, once his Dharma body was damaged, it was far more difficult to repair than Li Ziming's. This talisman Qi, said to gather and bind destiny and anchor one's life within a single mansion, made his fate more stable and harder to damage, refine, or wear down. His divine ability mana was also now more concentrated within the Shenyang mansion. This meant he relied less on his Dharma body and could control it more freely. Through various transformations, he could disperse damage and even recover faster, partially offsetting this weakness. At this rate, it feels less like the Purple Mansion and Golden Core path, and more like those heaven-born Devil Dao paths of the north. This was undoubtedly a major boost in combat. Although Li Xiaowei had not studied the heaven-born Devil Dao, the armor cycle soul-refining halberd art in his possession bore some traces of that style. Another aspect carrying forward the legacy in peace and displaying the might of bright yang pointed directly to the essence of ruler and subject, father and son, where cooperation and conflict coexisted. Much of its profundity was unrelated to combat or cultivation. At most, his own advancement might faintly benefit his descendants, though the effect was not significant and there were few other details. As for clearing demonic obstacles, that was the smallest effect of this register. It enhanced Bright Yang's ability to dispel evil. In terms of divine ability, it strengthened his Dharma body's resistance to the Devil Dao. It was a decent boost, but it was almost negligible compared to the earlier effects. As the talisman Qi settled upon him, Li Xiaowei's features grew more imposing. Strands of golden light pulsed at the center of his eyebrows. His Shenyang mansion felt cool and clear. After an unknown length of time, he slowly opened his eyes. In an instant, the chamber seemed to glow. His golden pupils faded from white gold to a deeper shade. The young man rested a hand at his waist and drew out a jade slip. Scrib. Tour of the Body Guarding Tiger Pass. Chapter 1446. It ends here. Mount Tangdao. The formation in the sky flickered, and dying flames littered the ground. In the distance, white qi poured down like a waterfall across the horizon. a master monk in a cassia robe raised a massive hammer and smashed it against the great formation. Boom! The sound thundered through the air. Cultivators of lower cultivation on both sides cried out in pain from the shock, but true fire soon surged forth, dissolving the brilliant light like mana. A woman holding a bright lamp descended while controlling flames, her face slightly pale. Li Minggong raised her head slightly and soon spotted a massive golden body flickering in and out among the clouds. It resembled a dark and terrifying golden statue suspended in the sky, filling the heart with dread. The techniques of the Merciful Ones had been intercepted one by formations on distant peaks. Though they had already advanced deeper, they seemed wary of something and did not descend personally, leaving a brief window for the cultivators in the formation to catch their breath. She did not know how the Northern War was going, but the continuous stream of Buddhist cultivators from Mount Zai-Oshi could only mean trouble. Looking around, the morale within the formation was low. The sect cultivators fared slightly better, but those from various families and regions, though silent, clearly showed signs of disarray. She had come to reinforce this place. Most of these people were not from her lake, and only a portion belonged under Azure Pond sect. Still, they knew her status was not small, so they acted timid, some even harboring silent dissatisfaction. The cultivators of Jiangnan do not truly care whether Jiangbei falls or not. Driven here by the supreme Yang Dao lineage, they have no real will to fight. And after so many years of war between North and South, too much vital qi has already been lost. But these matters were not for her to decide. Two black-clad cultivators approached on the wind and said in low voices, "Please make preparations early, fellow Taoist. If this formation cannot be held, we will escort you to retreat into the mountains." As a leading figure of a Purple Mansion realm immortal family, Li Minggong could not be allowed to fall into danger. The great Ziyuqi temple had long since arranged people to ensure she would not be harmed by the Buddhist cultivators. The moment these two appeared, the already scattered cultivators within the formation immediately started paying attention. None of them were fools. If Li Minggong and her group left, would that not mean sending the rest of them to their deaths? Li Minggong shook her head slightly, her gaze lowering. The cultivators below appeared unchanged, but from time to time, one or two would sneak a glance upward, only to drop their heads again in an instant. Li Minggong thought to herself, if you go back 30 or 50 years, my own ancestors were among people like them. That cold glance, who knows which family they were looking at back then. She raised her hand and dispersed the brilliant light in the sky, then said, "The pressure here is not too great. Now that we've reached this point, the Merciful Ones are not acting personally. It would be better to send more people. We can still hold." Li Minggong soothed the crowd while secretly asking, "How are things on the mountain? Have the elders returned?" The two exchanged a glance and replied through secret techniques, "We do not know. We only heard from fellow disciples near Lord Quan that his expression did not look good." Li Minggong let out a soft sigh. As she spoke, another streak of golden light descended from the sky, shaking the great formation. A rogue cultivator at the embryonic breathing realm high in the mountains had exhausted his mana and wavered as he fell. Fortunately, Li Minggong caught him with a gentle motion, supporting him with true fire. The old rogue cultivator steadied himself and quickly gave thanks from within the flames. With his left hand cradling a broken golden Dharma artifact, he wiped his chest with his right hand, which was missing its index finger, and called out, "Many thanks, my lady." Li Minggong had been holding this position for some time, and this was the first time she had heard someone thank her. She shook her head silently. The old rogue cultivator took the chance to weep. "After so many battles, all of my disciples are dead. If not for your help, I might have fallen from this mountain and died. I just don't know how long this will go on." Everyone below pricked up their ears. Li Minggong could only say, "Mount Tangdao is the gateway to Jiangnan. How long this continues depends on the north." The old man immediately cried out, "My disciples used to praise it, saying that after the Azure Pond sect shifted governance, the counties lived better and the tribute ease were lighter. There was no need to go to Yi Mountain City, and those filthy old practices were fewer. But now it seems the tribute was too light, leaving the elders stretched thin. Back then, people went north to seize resources. In the past, even when every household had to send one person to the southern border, it never came to the Dao lineage nearly being cut off." Silence fell all around. The current situation was not the matter of any single family. Even if the Kai family were still in the Azure Pond sect, things would not be much better now. Yet regimes change with people, and the improvements they had experienced were real. How could Li Minggong explain it? She simply held back the slightly agitated black-clad man beside her and shook her head. It cannot be compared to the past. She was about to speak when a figure rushed over and stopped before her, his expression stern as he said, "I am Linya. Taoist Master Zheajing requests your presence. Please return to the mountain at once. Leave this place to me." Li Minggong immediately brightened and nodded. She rode the flames away, quickly passing several checkpoints and entering the main formation. Everyone around her looked hurried and silent. After passing through a hall, she saw Li Ziming seated at the head. "Greetings, Taoist master." She could not tell Li Ziming's condition. He was usually not a rigid or stern figure and was always kind to juniors, but there was no smile on his face anymore as he asked quietly, "How are the losses?" Li Minggong immediately answered at the same volume. "According to the news I've received, Jiangxia is still relatively safe, but Mount Zioshi has been attacked. Of the formations that fell, 2 belong to our family. One was guarded by Xunxin of the family, the other by Fei Qingyi. I've heard both formations were destroyed. It is unclear whether Fei Qingyi survived or managed to rescue any of our juniors. Cheng Qi and Chengpen were both there. Fortunately, their jade talismans remain intact." With a group of merciful ones and Purple Mansion realm cultivators gathered there, the jade talismans were little more than psychological comfort. Li Ziming remained relatively calm and said, "Fei Qingyi defected to the Devil Dao and has been captured by Zhao Wei. There is no need to consider him further." The weight of these words was immense. Li Minggong froze for a moment, then said in shock and delight, "Mingwang he." Li Ziming simply waved his hand, his expression complicated as he said, "Wait for me outside." Li Minggong withdrew at once. Only then did Li Ziming's gaze reveal a flicker of uncertainty. There was only one reason. He had not seen a single member of the supreme Yang Dao lineage once he had arrived. The inner formation of the Black Wave Sea-piercing Spirit Formation on Mount Tangdao had already been sealed shut. How could this be acceptable? This was an extremely bad sign. What kind of situation required such measures? Li Ziming's first reaction was to summon Li Minggong at once. After all, with the situation in the north unknown, nothing that followed would be surprising. How could it come to this? He had only been seated for a few breaths when a few sharp sounds rang out from outside the hall. A sword-bearing man stepped in. His face was slightly pale, yet it could not conceal the effortless grace of a swordsman. Fellow Taoist Zheajing. This was Taoist Master Zhosheng of the Shawang Kingdom, a cultivator of Jade True. He gestured for him to enter the inner formation together. His expression was complicated as he looked him over and saw that Li Ziming was not in good condition either. He said softly Hengzhu took action at Lower Luo as well. The national preceptor of Zhao, Wei Xunian, also headed south. Fortunately, fellow Taoist Zio intervened, but then Cheng Xiao appeared. They fought for quite some time. Wei Xunian is truly formidable, Qiki. He fell silent for a moment, then finally spoke through secret techniques. We retreated while fighting from the north. From Lower Luo to Mount Tangdao, it took less than half the time it takes to drink tea. He coughed up blood 3 times. That blood, it was completely white and turned into shrews. It was not a pleasant sight. Qiki. A chill ran through Li Ziming's heart. Before he could ask more, they had already reached the great hall shrouded in dark light. Passing through the faint black barrier, he saw black smoke cascading like a waterfall down the steps. Crows circled overhead, perching on the eaves and screeching harshly. As Li Ziming appeared, flocks of black crows swooped down, crying out in mournful calls, their tears falling like rain. Yet the bright yang radiance on his body evaporated them, preventing anything from drawing near. Chapter 1447, It Ends Here, II. At the entrance of the dim hall, Tinglin stood with tears in her eyes, seeing. The two, she gave a slight bow and lifted her sleeve. Purple chi burst forth, shooting into the sky. It tore through the hall, shattering bricks and stones, ripping the roof clean off and leaving debris scattered everywhere. The crows scattered in fright, leaving chaos in their wake. What is this? Li Ziming froze for a moment. Tinglin shook her head and said hoarsely, You are of imperial descent. When bright yang enters in a guest or weakened position, the yin chi becomes confined, which benefits veiled yin. You should not have come, but at this point, it no longer matters. Removing the roof dispels that confinement, making it more comfortable for him. How did it come to this? Li Ziming had expected that the supreme Yang Dao lineage might suffer losses, but he had never imagined it would be Qiki who fell. His heart grew heavy. Tinglin shook her head and said bitterly, The situation changed. Who could have predicted it? That talisman should not have had this effect. The opponent had already seen our trump card, adjusted their divine ability and modified their techniques. Forgive my bluntness. Li Ziming felt unease rise within him. Fortunately, she stopped there. He said nothing and followed her inside, bracing himself. At once he heard faint coughing and heavy breathing. Ha. The breathing sounded like labored gasps, yet also like the cry of some bird, something between a crow and a hawk, wounded and calling out. It was not loud, but it carried a strange, almost laughing tone. The hall lay open and a violent wind swept through. Dark shapes stirred and lifted. They were all black feathers, large and small, swirling and rolling as they fluttered past his ankles. Li Ziming found a man in black lying before the steps of the main seat, a talisman affixed to his chest. His half-closed eyes were pale gray, his face turned upward as he coughed without end. It was Kyuaki. Taoist Master Hufu stood at the side with his eyes closed, saying nothing, like a silent specter. Li Ziming only glanced once and dared not look further. He said softly, "I cultivate bright yang. I might be able to help." The man above showed no reaction and continued coughing. Tinglin sat quietly below the steps and said, "We have already considered it. Between veiled yin and bright yang, only one can suppress the other. Wei Xunian is a grand Taoist master. Your intervention would only make things worse." As the two spoke, Kyuaki slowly turned his head. This Taoist master, once proud and self-assured, now lay with his cheek pressed against the cold steps, devoid of all dignity, and spoke in a low voice, Li Ziming. "Senior." Kyuaki fell silent for a moment, then asked between breaths, "Your family and…" At that point he suddenly struggled, his mouth opening wide, his eyes staring blankly. Li Ziming caught sight of a small, crimson tip of flesh slowly emerging between his teeth. It vanished in an instant as it was swallowed back by Kyuaki. He forced a smile and said, "You held back Hellion Wujiang and the losses were heavy. We are deeply grateful. However, the treasure plate carries symbolic meaning and cannot be given lightly. As for that portion of essence, I will have Hufu bring it to you." Li Ziming simply said, "Please focus on your recovery, senior." Kyuaki shook his head. He did not mention anything else, but instead said in a heavy voice, "Zhugong has her faults and has done things that were less than honorable, but she gave it her all at Mount Zioshi. If the Kong family should rise again, matters of the Mountain Gate, I hope you will lend some effort." Li Ziming naturally understood what he meant. Though the Kong family had fallen into decline, Kong Tingyun was still unaccounted for, and likely in seclusion somewhere. She was someone on very good terms with the Li family, and once a close friend of Li Yunjiao. Meanwhile, Zhugong's whereabouts were currently unknown. After two such battles, who knew what severe injuries she had sustained? Even if she survived, she would have little strength left. The rewards from the supreme Yang Dao lineage would no doubt be generous, and she might recover quickly. But if Kong Tingyun were to reappear, given her ties with the Li family, turmoil would surely follow. In truth, Zhugong did not have a good reputation and carried a stained past. If she were to take the Dao lineage and flee back to the Eastern Sea now, few could object. Yet even at death's door, Kyuaki was still preserving a shred of dignity for the supreme Yang Dao lineage, hoping to keep the worst outcomes within control. But even if Kong Tingyun has broken through, she would only be at the early stage of the Purple Mansion realm, facing Zhugong, backed by the entire supreme Yang Dao lineage. How could she act so recklessly? Why would he ask this? Li Ziming sighed inwardly and replied, "Kong Tingyun is not an aggressive person. You are worrying T. Much, senior." Kyuaki opened his mouth again. From now on, the Li family will face the north directly. But after speaking just that one line, that crimson tip pushed its way out again between his lips. The fleshy point looked slick and viscous, lined with faint pale veins, expanding and contracting. The man in black tried to swallow it back, pounding his chest, but finally turned to the side and vomited toward the ground. Ugh! Blood sprayed across the floor. A large spray of blood, crimson mixed with black, carried an oval object as it hit the ground. It even bounced with a strange elasticity, rolling twice before stopping at Tinglin's feet. Only then did Li Ziming see clearly. It was his heart. The heart pulsed, contracting and expanding forcefully. White veins stretched outward, and a small tufted white nose poked out from within a thick blood vessel, only to shrink back in an instant, as if frightened. It seemed there was a formation suppressing the hall, or perhaps the talisman was affecting it. Though the blood on the ground was steadily turning white, it did not transform into a phenomenon. Kyuaki immediately grabbed the heart, his hands stained with blood. He held it with 4 fingers, one finger resting limply against it. The dying man stirred slightly. He asked nothing further and exhaled softly. "Mount Tangdao is not to be held, then withdraw." Li Ziming had waited so long, only to hear these words in the end. He watched as the blood-stained hand lifted slightly, then loosened. The heart slipped to the ground, rolled over, and turned into a white shrew with a swollen belly, visibly pregnant. It struggled, letting out shrill squeaks. "Kaim Shishi." Kyuaki raised his head to the sky. In the distance, layer upon layer of black mist rose, and the midday sky dimmed at once. Tinglin and Li Ziming also looked up together, their gazes fixed on the north and filled with complexity. As the black mist surged upward, streaks of rainbow-like dragons swam through it. As if having completed some mission, they roared with cries that sounded both joyful and mournful before plunging down to the ground. Clang, clang, clang. At the same time, the great Kui Convergence bronze sword at Kyuki's waist began to tremble wildly, letting out one mournful cry after another. A violent wind swept across the mountain. A tear suddenly slipped from the corner of the man's eye as he cried out in grief, "Master." As the black mist rose in the distant sky, endless black light spread behind his head. Black clouds gathered with owls, forming a storm that seemed to reach the heavens. Great crows howled, their cries piercing the soul. The owls darted everywhere, their eerie forms weaving through the gloom. Amid the surging black light, the man began to vomit blood. His liver, spleen, lungs, and stomach burst forth one after another from his mouth as the talisman failed to suppress his body. It leaped free and transformed into a large-eyed owl, its gaze sharp as it stared at the sky. The owl glanced once, then swiftly turned back. It let out low hoots that sounded both excited and fearful, then struck with lightning speed, snapping up and swallowing his eye. In that instant, the dying man on the ground lifted his head. His remaining eye bulged, bloodshot, filled with unwillingness and fury. His mouth opened soundlessly, yet a wailing cry burst from the owl's beak, shooting into the sky, twisted and sinister. "Supreme Yang, bright light ends here." The owl beat its wings and circled in the air. The voice formed from the last trace of his life was trapped within this small inner formation, echoing again and again, never to be released. "Supreme Yang, bright light ends here. It ends here." Chapter 1448, Greater Good Eye. The owls in the sky screeched as tears streamed down Hufu's face, who was standing to the side like a ghost. He stepped back within the surging black light, lifted his sleeve, and took out a white talisman. The talisman bore profound and intricate patterns as it radiated brilliant light. It shone with an upright, resplendent brilliance within the black glow. The owls circling higher and higher in the sky seemed to receive some kind of summons. Reluctant and struggling, they descended, carrying all the black light with them, condensing once more into a single talisman that flew into the white talisman. Then the great crows shrieked harshly and fell from the sky in droves, smashing against broken pillars and thrones. Blood splattered everywhere as they died one after another. In less than half a quarter hour, the corpses of birds covered the ground, wings stiff, eyes wide open, leaving the place in utter ruin. The black mist at the horizon seemed to be suppressed by something. It did not spread, but instead weakened continuously and vanished. A Taoist master with 3 divine abilities, and a sword immortal grand Taoist master with 4 divine abilities fell at the same moment. How overbearing, what a display of power. Light pulsed through the sky as the black glow gradually receded. The grand formation's radiance dimmed, and a woman appeared in the wind. She landed nearby, withdrew her enchanted umbrella, and stood in silence. It was Hangsing. Li Ziming stood among the scattered bird corpses, while Tinglin stepped aside. They watched as Hufu walked up the steps one at a time. The man in brown robes tucked the talisman back into his sleeve, his expression already calm again. He sat down where Kyuki's body had once been, raised his brows slightly, and said quietly, "I have received my martial uncle's final order to withdraw to Jiangnan." Hangsing's expression was extremely complex as her red lips pressed together, but with her gaze lowered, the emotions in her eyes could not be seen. After several breaths, Li Ziming finally noticed 2 lines of tears streaming down her pale face, as if she were quietly sobbing. So stubborn about his pride, did Lin Jianqi not know how dangerous this journey was? He had at least reached the Purple Mansion realm. The cultivators had sensed that something was unusual about this North-South conflict, but none had expected the North to be so ruthless. Hangsing's words sounded more like an emotional outburst. Hufu lowered his head slightly and replied, "Everyone makes their own choices. Risky moves bring risky consequences. Many thanks to you both for considering the overall situation." Hangsing's emotions turned to deep grief and pain. Gritting her teeth, she said, "Year after year you closed your Dao lineage, allowing devil cultivators and Buddhist cultivators to run rampant. Who knows how many lives were lost back then, and now you act so righteous. Why not think of the greater good, take some of the people's blood essence, or use a few Purple Mansion realm spirit items? With the abilities of your great Ziyuqi temple, how could you not save him? Greater good, so why not think of the greater good now? If your great Ziyuqi temple had thought of the greater good earlier, become another Azurpan sect, and made use of the heaven-born devil Dao, you could have resisted the devil cultivators and Buddhist cultivators in the north by now. Even if many cultivators and common folk had suffered, would that not still be better than letting those fiends sweep across all of Zhongbei? Even now, if you truly cared about the greater good, shouldn't you save Lin Jianqi first? Isn't it just condoning killing? Has there been any shortage of that? She turned to look at Tinglin and cried. At worst, it would have been like Kai Wei. At least you could have settled things. But instead you insist on walking the orthodox Dao all the way without clarity while entangling yourselves ambiguously with the North. The North-South conflict. The North-South conflict. Was it not your northern factions working with those Buddhist cultivators in the past? When you stood by and watched the Murong family move south, did you ever think of today, bargaining with a tiger? And now everything has fallen apart. At this point, she finally choked up and fell silent. Tinglin wept without speaking. Hufu raised his brows, his gaze somewhat dim. What is the greater good? Our Ziyuqi Dao was never particularly renowned. It was once only a branch of Hui upper sect. At that time, the world was in chaos. True monarch Teiyu came from the sea, took over as head of the branch, and established a Dao lineage called the Kui cultivating sect, bringing peace to the region. The true monarch passed down the Dao lineage and took in 2 disciples. One bore the surname Lin, the ancestor Honglin of our great Ziyuqi temple, and held the Tianziu. The other bore the surname Nian, who held the Bu Yue, and was the forebear of the present Nian family, Taoist Master Dongtai. Taoist Master Tinglin said nothing, listening as he continued. Later, the true monarch sought the Dao and went to Jiangbei with Taoist Master Dongtai and several cultivators, establishing the Yue cultivating sect. Ancestor Honglin remained to preside over the Kui cultivating sect. After the ancestor fell, he left a final decree to establish a temple, changing the character Ziu to Ziu and adding the character Great, thus founding the present Great Ziyuqi Temple. Hufu's expression dimmed as he said, if we speak in terms of Dao lineage, the Yue cultivating sect and the Kui cultivating sect come from the same source. But in terms of lineage inheritance, the Yue cultivating sect is our superior sect. Jiangbei, the 3 streams, even the Yue cultivating mountain gate, whether it was Lord Luing or Martial Uncle Kueki, both had once gone there and cultivated there. Li Ziming felt both grief and shock as he listened, thinking to himself, yet the Yue cultivating sect never made a move. The man before him continued quietly, the Origin Mansion once issued an order, immortals and mortals were to remain separate. All sects were to withdraw into the mountains and forests, forbidden from exercising rule. All were to uphold Green Pine and not act in the name of Supreme Yin. At that time that was the greater good. Later, the Origin Mansion sealed itself and no longer manifested in this world. In Jiangbei and Jiangnan, only 4 factions adhered most strictly to these rules. The Yue cultivating sect, the Sword sect, Ziyuqi Dao Gate, and Hangzhou Dao Gate. Tinglin remained silent at the side as Hufu said softly, under the great Ziyuqi temple, mountain peaks spread everywhere and temples stood in clusters. Since then, before Martial Uncle Kuki's time, our Ziyuqi did not intervene much. Even when Li Jiangqun proclaimed himself a successor of Supreme Yin, Lord Luing merely went to Yue cultivating sect to study and never joined his faction. In terms of staying detached from worldly affairs, the rules of our great Ziyuqi temple are no fewer than those of the Sword sect. We are simply far removed in the deep mountains. We're not guided by moral orthodoxy and lack spirit pine and sword scriptures, yet when the time comes to change, the difficulties are just as great. Having come this far, I will speak bluntly. Aside from matters concerning your Hangzhou Dao Gate, our great Ziyuqi temple has wronged no one. Now that Martial Uncle Kueki has fallen, it was also for the sake of the supreme Yang Dao lineage and for the greater good. Otherwise, we could have withdrawn into Hui. What would the affairs of Jiangbei have to do with us? Hufu slowly closed his eyes and said softly, the matter of the Azure Pond sect was merely the Kai family alone. Now it has already been destroyed. Hengxing wiped her tears and shook her head. Do you think I simply do not understand? Now is not the time to argue. I only have a few questions. Everyone speaks of the greater good, but how many truly act for it? The northern mountains, the Golden One Dao lineage speak with such certainty. Is everything they do now not for their own greater good? The so-called greater good is important, yes, but more often it is merely a tool the orthodox Dao uses to temporarily bend its own bottom line. It forces some to compromise, and at times even abandoning morality is excused. How many evils began in the name of the greater good? How many killings have been justified by it? With tears in her eyes, she said angrily, Lin Jianqi was willing to die for this. How many in this world could be like him? Chapter 1449, Greater Good II. Hengxing turned away. A few drops of tears fell and transformed into a gust of red wind. She picked up a black feather from the ground, passed through the formation, and drifted away, dissolving into a streak of red. Hufu stood quietly on the steps, watching her depart. After an unknown amount of time, he let out a breath and asked, How is Ningguan? Tinglin lowered her gaze and replied, She has returned to the Azure Pond sect. There is no news for now. Deep exhaustion appeared in the eyes of the brown-robed youth. Cultivators of the great Ziyuqi temple were mostly proud, and Hufu in particular was known for valuing his dignity. Yet after all that had happened, he was utterly worn out. Looking at Li Ziming, he said softly, We have made a spectacle of ourselves before Zhejiang. You may take your people back as appropriate. We still have matters to handle. We will discuss things with you again later. Although the matter had long been settled, Li Ziming still felt somewhat despondent. Even the region of the 3 streams cannot be held. From now on, the land beyond the river will be the domain of Buddhist cultivators. The withdrawal of the supreme Yang Dao lineage from Jiangbei was truly bad news for Li Ziming. once Buddhist cultivators and devil cultivators entered White River Stream, who knew how much trouble would follow. "All right," Li Ziming responded softly. Hufu reached into his sleeve and took out a jade box. He lifted the lid and revealed the item inside. It was a palm-sized, round black stone pillar, with its recessed parts gleaming brightly. "Fellow Taoist, make use of this for now. As for your injuries, we feel quite apologetic. We do not have the Kilin Radiance Illumination pill with us at the moment. We will arrange some for you later." Li Ziming declined a couple of times and did not accept it. When he took his leave, Hufu shook his head silently and said, "Have someone deliver it to Moongaze Lake." Though nothing happened at the lake this time, they were still frightened. It would not be good to let them entertain other thoughts. After all, Li Xiaowei had stopped Helian Wumeng. Otherwise, the lake would likely have been a scene of slaughter. The matter might seem minor, but in truth it was not. If one were to pursue it, it would become quite troublesome. Tinglin watched him leave and said, "Awfully, he has always lacked a bright truth harmonizing divine pill. Bright Yang's spiritual essence is indeed good, but each portion used is one less portion. It should not be used excessively. You must weigh things carefully." Hufu looked somewhat helpless and lowered his gaze as he said, "Of course I know. Things are no longer as they were. Now that Zhangbei is lost, we will face difficulties everywhere. We did not even secure the items from Miffin. It is uncertain whether anything will reach our hands next time. We must act with restraint and make long-term plans." But Li Ziming is not like the others. Martial Uncle kept him within the formation and gave explicit instructions. It is already very clear. Since spiritual essence was specifically mentioned, we cannot withhold it. And in the eyes of others, it is the same. Li Ziming was close to us and gave his all to hold back Helian Wujiang. If he cannot receive a fair share of the good items even then, others will not remain willing to serve us. Not to mention, there is also Li Xiaowei. Hufu rubbed the center of his brows. Now that he had taken charge, he was keenly feeling the burdens Kueki once carried. He said, "As for the bright truth harmonizing divine pill you mentioned, since he needs it, keeping it on hand will allow us to act more calmly next time." Tinglin responded softly, "Now that we have returned to Jiangnan, things should be easier going forward. Zhao Shooting's intervention this time was unexpected. I wonder what will happen next. We should thank him for this matter, but we should not place our hopes on him in the future." Hufu showed a trace of regret as he replied. He cultivated pit water early on and forced a path forward through sheer will. Though pit water has no master, the path remains extremely difficult. The reason he returned is solely because the arrangements at Mount Zainiu are not yet complete. After Li Ziming left the hall and exited the inner formation, he saw a sword cultivator of the Jade True Dao sitting by a green stone, pouring himself a drink. Taoist Master Zhosheng asked, "How is fellow Taoist Kueki?" He quickly understood from Li Ziming's troubled expression that the news was not good. He brushed his sleeves and stood, mourning silently for a few breaths, then shook his head with his hands behind his back and said, "I saw fellow Taoist Hanxing rush out in haste without even stopping. I knew then that things were not good." Li Ziming exchanged a few pleasantries with him, then Zhosheng said, "I heard from Tinglin that the aged courtly path scripture is in your possession. When there is an opportunity, I would like to take a look as well, mainly for the dust of the court. It is also mentioned within my Dao lineage. It would be best if I could examine it." One portion of the dust of the court had already been used in advance. Who knew how long it would be before another could be obtained? Still, he had merely mentioned it in passing. Zhosheng could see that Li Ziming was distracted and thus saw him off. Li Ziming took his leave, his heart filled with worry. When he returned to the main hall, Li Minggong was still waiting at the side and reported, "The matter concerning the Fei family has been reported. The family's intention is to consult Mount Tangdao." How could Li Ziming not understand Li Zhongqian's intent? It was only that Li Minggong had not experienced the upheaval within the family and only knew of Fei Qingyi's rebellion, hence the question. Li Ziming's expression turned cold as he waved his hand and said, "Go directly to Wen Wu and have him deal with it." In this matter, Li Ziming clearly felt more lingering fear than Li Xiaowei and the others. Li Minggong's expression turned serious as she quickly withdrew, leaving Li Ziming sitting alone in the hall. The Taoist master poured himself a cup of tea, his gaze drifting to the distant night sky, where waves of black surged and shifted. The evening sun was completely obscured, without a trace of red visible. He sat in silent thought. After a long while, he rested his hand on the table and raised his cup. Yehui, what choice will he make? Mount Xiaoshi. The setting sun was blood-red as wreckage lay everywhere. A massive golden body stood among the clouds, radiating layers of light. Monks ran about below while master monks rode the wind in all directions, exuding a chilling, killing intent. Buddhist cultivators were unlike the immortal Tao and did not establish many formations. After several merciful ones captured Mount Zaiyoshi, they immediately prepared to head for Mount Tangdao, leaving no time to clean up the place. The 3 Buddhist cultivators who had gone north had yet to return and were stationed near Mount Tangdao's main peak, leaving the place sparse and empty. It was only when a merciful one passed through and brought Hellion Wumeng back to station here that the scattered resistance Gr. Duly faded away. The man with 18 glass beads at his waist approached on baleful Qi, holding a long-handled oar blade. His expression was calm, but when he saw the monks and master monks swarming densely across the ground like ants, a trace of disgust appeared in his eyes. Spreading wherever they go like weeds. At that moment a nun flew over from the side, standing upon a lotus throne. With a hint of delight on her face, she smiled and said, "Greetings, General Hellion. I am Nuxio, under the seat of great desire." Hellion Wumeng glanced at her. After all, the Buddhist cultivators had just sent someone to receive him. Though her cultivation was lacking, her status seemed far from low. She was clearly someone with backing. His expression softened slightly as he said casually, "So it is merciful one Nuxio." As if recalling something, he let out a few cold laughs and said, "I suppose whatever I saw at the shore, merciful one Nuxio knows quite clearly as well. You have come eagerly to inquire about it, have you not?" After all, the war that allowed the Hellion family to rise was when the Qi Emperor campaigned against the Crown Prince of Wei. As a Purple Mansion realm cultivator of the Hellion family, Hellion Wumeng naturally knew the entanglements between these Buddhist cultivators and the Wei's Li factions. Unexpectedly, Merciful One Nuxio revealed a somewhat wistful regret at his question and replied, "The general speaks rightly, but that person's life is too valuable. It is not something a minor figure like me can lay a hand on. Perhaps one day, in a great siege, I might linger at the side and snatch a bite or two. That would already be considered fortunate." Are you even worthy? The heaven-venerating gate is already adept at killing merciful ones. Once he grows stronger, if you dare show your face before him, that alone would count as courage. Hellion Wumeng was proud by nature and held himself in high regard. In all his years of battle, only that one person had ever made him regard them as a lifelong enemy after a single clash. Deep down, he looked down on Buddhist cultivators, and he let out a couple of cold, disdainful laughs. Yet the nun before him maintained her bright smile, completely unbothered by his cold attitude, and replied, "I have obtained a treasure. Seeing that the general has returned, I came specially to ask, hoping you might honor me with a look." Chapter 1450, Elder Cousin I. Blood water on the ground reflected the setting sun as it gradually dried. The residual glow of formations flickered faintly in the sunset. Amid the raging wind stood a man clad in black robes, his hair gray-white, with blood flowing over his body. Though he wore a neat mustache and appeared upright and solemn, his face was filled with ruthless ferocity. His gray-black eyes reflected the blood-red sunset. The golden alms bowl enlarged before him once more, forcing the man to raise his Dharma sword and strike it head-on. Clang! The man in black felt his arms sink with weight as his head spun. Blood trickled from his nose, and his throat filled with a bitter, metallic taste. He could not help coughing twice, spraying blood across his clothes. "My lord!" Voices echoed in his ears. The man in black forced himself to turn his head and saw his younger cousin kneeling nearby, vomiting blood. The scene before his eyes blurred in and out, while the golden light in the sky grew ever brighter, making it impossible for Li Chengqi to keep his eyes open. At this moment, Li Chengqi realized his life was at its end. He quietly glanced at the blood on his robes, stepped back, and planted his Dharma sword into the ground to support himself. His blood-soaked robes no longer fluttered, clinging heavily to his body. Supporting himself in a daze, a thought surfaced in his mind. How far have the Buddhist cultivators advanced? Is Minggong still safe? Among the direct descendants of the family, Li Minggong had been specifically entrusted by Tinglin to Wan Wu and placed in the rear. Li Chengqi was only at the Qi cultivation realm, with poor innate ability, and naturally was not someone Tinglin paid attention to. Still, Wan Wu had considered matters carefully, assigning him to the distant southern region far from Lower Luo, alongside Fei Qingyi. Unfortunately, Mount Zaiyoshi had fallen, exposing this place to the front lines. The Purple Smoke Gate disciples stationed here died in battle, Fei Qingyi fled, and countless casualties followed, leaving only a few of them behind. In his haze, Li Chengqi noticed that the Buddhist cultivator before him had not seized this rare opportunity, and instead seemed annoyed. That hint of annoyance sent a chill through Li Chengqi. As the leading figure of the Yuandu lineage and the paternal uncle of Li Zhufeng, Li Chengqi's status was not low. It was only that his temperament was not agreeable. Strictly speaking, he could call Li Ziming his seventh uncle. After Li Ziming's son Li Chengzhai died, Li Chengqi was in fact the closest male relative among the Chengming of the first lineage and had received considerable favor since childhood. At that moment, a chill surged through his heart, snapping his mind into clarity. Buddhist cultivators have many methods. They will surely implicate my family. I must die quickly. He drew his sword, but the golden bowl shot forward like lightning, crashing heavily into his Dharma sword. Sparks burst forth as Li Chengqi spat out blood and nearly collapsed to the ground. He tried to circulate his mana, but he quickly found that the golden light pouring down from above disrupted it, making it impossible to gather. As Li Chengqi faltered, Li Chengpen beside him fared even worse. Holding his spear horizontally, he was struck squarely by a blow from the opposing Buddhist cultivator. With a thud, he dropped to his knees, vomiting blood. That single strike did not kill Li Chengpen, but it jolted Li Chengqi awake. A sense of dread rose within him. Though Chengpen has slightly better innate ability, his character is weak and hesitant. He is not even as capable as Li Zhuluo. Back when Li Zhuluo managed the family and Li Chengpen was wronged, Li Chengqi would have stood up for any family members. Yet Li Chengpen had been deeply moved and followed him ever since, respecting him like an elder brother. After so many years together, how could Li Chengqi not know his limits? Gratitude aside, what could outweigh life and death? Would something go wrong? He forced his body, which felt as if it were breaking inch by inch, to move forward quickly. But the golden bowl tore through the air once again and struck his Dharma sword. With a sharp metallic crack, the battle-worn Dharma artifact finally snapped. Clang! The blade fell to the ground with a clear sound. Only a broken half remained in Li Chengqi's hand. He staggered back again and again, retreating to Li Chengpen's side. Through his haze, he caught sight of Chengpen's blood-covered face and heard the young man coughing up blood as he cried, "My lord." Li Chengqi hesitated for a brief instant, and golden light burst before his eyes like lightning. The world spun. A sharp pain struck the back of his head, and all his strength seemed to drain away as he crashed heavily to the ground. Light streamed across the sky as baleful chi surged. Two figures descended, one black and one gold. The devil cultivator wore silver-black armor and stood upon rolling baleful chi, while the merciful one shone with brilliant light, seated upon a pink-green lotus throne. In an instant, heaven and earth changed color. Golden light rolled endlessly, blocking out the blood-red sunset. Master monks stood suspended in the air on both sides, watching intently. Li Chengqi swallowed his blood and struggled back to his feet, hearing the merciful one in the sky say with a smile, "Earlier, we obtained someone from the Ning family, and we had no share in it as Zhu Wang took him away. Now there are these two, an unexpected delight." Li Chengqi's heart sank. Not far away, several cultivators had already knelt, even showing relief. Nearby, Li Chengpen dropped his spear and knelt blankly. Nuxiao stood in the sky and said with a smile, "By great destiny, you have witnessed the bright light great desire Tao. Turn from evil and return to righteousness. Why not kneel and give thanks?" Dong! As her words fell, a distant bell tolled. Pleas and grateful cries echoed everywhere. Li Chengpen wept bitterly. Though he made no sound, he slowly lowered his head in silence. The merciful one in the sky nodded with a smile, showing satisfaction. Buddhist Tao had plenty of experience converting people, so how could they fail to see it? Few changed allegiance as swiftly as flipping a page. Most people were indecisive. A lowered head, a moment of silence, a slight wavering, and what seemed like an ambiguous gesture made everything else follow naturally. On the ground, Li Chengpen's hands trembled, yet he could no longer stand. Suddenly his collar tightened. A piercing chill spread as if something struck the back of his head. Golden light blazed, and a voice full of hatred rang in his ears like a cuckoo crying blood. "Stand up!" Li Chengqi, his hair already gray-white, had all his mana sealed, and was now no different from a mortal. The broken blade he thrust toward the back of Chengpen's head was stopped by a flash of golden light, forcing him down instead. The old man could no longer endure it. His sword slipped from his hand with a clang as he collapsed to the ground, shouting hoarsely, "Li Chengpen, stand up." His expression was as hard as stone, just as resolute as when he once stood before Li Chengpen on Mount Qingdu. Yet now it carried a coldness like snow and a bone-deep hatred that tore at the heart. Bright red blood flowed from his trembling lips. "Li Chengpen." But Li Ch. Pan remained much as he had been in the past, kneeling on the ground, his posture scarcely changed. He said nothing, only weeping as his hands trembled. Through tear-blurred eyes, the elders who once sat in great chairs whispering among themselves seemed to dissolve like smoke, replaced by the grim figures of Buddhist and devil cultivators standing high above. He could not utter a single word and did not even dare turn to look at the old man screaming behind him. Nuxiao burst into laughter, watching the scene below with satisfaction. Golden light reflected in her pupils. Master monks across the sky began solemnly chanting scriptures. Multicolored clouds gathered as if a ritual was underway, accompanied by a resonant hum. Lose first, then gain, and desire is released. Gain first, then lose, and the heart is freed. As the chanting rose, distant bells echoed from the horizon, joined by dense wooden fish sounds approaching from afar. Li Chengpen's heart suddenly calmed. The sounds dulled his grief and filled the bottomless fear within him, sinking deep into his bones, impossible to remove. He pressed his palms together and bowed his head quietly. The raging wind swept his dark hair aside. Within the radiant golden light, he found a place for his guilt to rest. Behind him, the old man struggled on the ground like a dying fish. The distant wooden fish sounds did not calm his hatred, but only made him more furious, more unrestrained. From his eyes poured a flame-like red resentment, trickling down from the corners. Your father died early. I was the one who helped you. You were brought up by me, and today you turn to the Buddhist Tao. When you were framed and no one dared speak, I risked being dragged down by Li Zixuan and defended you before all the elders. And today you turn to the Buddhist Tao. You have betrayed my care, my support year after year. Bastard, I should blame my own soft heart. You leave me without honor in life and unable to rest in death. Chapter 1451, Elder Cousin II. Li Chengqi's body twisted amid the pounding wooden fish sounds. His mustache, dripping with blood, grew longer and longer. His body seemed to writhe with countless crawling things, sprouting hooves, scales, and flicking tongues, as it transformed into a crawling venomous creature that leapt upon the ground. The chanting above intensified, and someone called out, Li Chengpen, subdue the venomous creature, clear away the past. It is time to sever worldly ties. Li Chengpen turned around. The old man's empty robes only contained a hateful, aimless, venomous creature, hopping without direction. Li Chengpen lifted it by the jaw and ran his hand down its skin, tearing away its extra limbs. Green blood spilled out in pools. With tears in his eyes, he said, Elder Cousin. The cry was heartrending, like a Suona wail echoing through the air. Li Chengpen's usually timid and troubled eyes became clear, and his back straightened. The venomous creature seemed struck by lightning. As its evil nature was stripped away and its demonic intent pacified, it coiled around him in a daze, its scales turning golden. Li Chengpen pressed his palms together again and bowed. Now that I have witnessed the true path of bright enlightenment, I cast away the afflictions of the 6 roots and am willing to serve under you, cultivating toward the true fruition. The merciful one in the sky smiled with delight and replied, Wrong, wrong. Who would have thought such fine destiny would appear? You are meant to enter my great desire Tao. We should take this Taoist friend to the Buddhist land, meet the Great One, and see if there is a place reserved. Laughter immediately filled the sky as voices called out, Wonderful, wonderful. And again they shouted, Seen through, seen through. Mid the celebratory golden light, only Hellion Wumeng at the side looked grim. His grip on the long-handled ore blade tightened, causing the spirit artifact to hum. A sinister light slowly appeared in his eyes, as if his entire body felt uneasy. He thought to himself, he is still of imperial blood. Though he himself had intended to capture a member of the Li family to exchange for spirit items, no matter what, one either killed them or traded them back. Their ancestors were among the foremost figures of the world. How could they be treated like this? His gaze turned cold as he said mercilessly, Nuxiao, you brought me here to see this. Nuxiao was briefly taken aback, then forced a smile as she said, Was this not to let you vent some of your anger? Hellion Wumeng had suffered a setback on the northern shore, but he held himself as someone of stature. How could he tolerate such a scene? He laughed coldly, anger laced in his voice, absurd. Please wait, sir, Nuxiao hurriedly stopped him, forcing a smile as she said, Lord Wujiang is currently discussing the Tao before our Maha seat. Why not come along? At these words, Hellion W. Wumeng frowned, uncertain of her intentions, and said coldly, Oh. Nuxiao smiled and said, Do not be misled by how sturdy that formation appears, as though it would take great effort to break. The supreme Yang Dao lineage is about to withdraw. Great primordial hidden radiance mountain will soon belong to us. Dark clouds hung heavy over the northern shore. Dazzling streams of light shot back from the north, splitting through layers of brilliance in the sky before quickly landing nearby. Elder Cousin. A dignified-looking man in black robes stood waiting in the wind, golden chi surrounding him. One hand lightly tapped the hilt of his sword. Beside him stood a smiling woman in splendid attire, her features delicate and refined. The man he called cousin appeared honest and steady, but much older. As he hurried back, accompanied by a tall young man, his presence seemed even more solid, though his face was somewhat pale. Turning back, he sighed and said, Julio, you have returned. I was already within the Azure Ponsec's domain. I came after receiving news of devil cultivators on the northern shore. I did not expect the family to have already resolved matters and gained such a great joy. Congratulations on your triumphant return, cousin, replied Li Julio. Li Julio had been waiting near the lake. When devil cultivators appeared on the northern shore, the family had sent out a distress signal. His wife had just emerged from seclusion, so he brought Pang Yunqing with him, both to reinforce the family and to see his kin. The smile on his face was sincere, without a trace of jealousy. With Li Xiaowei breaking through to the Purple Mansion realm so swiftly, their family now had 2 Purple Mansion realm cultivators. This was excellent news for him, and for his descendants alike, all the more so since it was his own brother who had advanced. Though he was full of joy and felt it could not be better, the man before him showed no sign of happiness. After hearing the congratulations, Li Zhufeng forced a smile and, full of expectation, asked, "Have you seen Uncle return? I have asked several times but received no answer. Perhaps we should ask the Taoist master." He was naturally referring to Li Chengqi. As for the Taoist master, he did not mean Li Ziming, who had yet to appear, but Li Xiaowei, who was cultivating at the lake. Ever since the events at Mount Qingdu, Li Zhuliuo had maintained a pleasant demeanor, though he held a poor impression of Li Chengqi. Even so, this matter made him pause in surprise and asked, "Uncle did not return with you. No one knows where the Taoist master is. It would not be appropriate to disturb him." Though he did not know the details and was unaware that Fei Qingyi had been with them and was now missing, his first instinct was not to disturb Li Xiaowei. Hearing this, Chen Yang, who was standing to the side, broke into a cold sweat and hurried forward to comfort them quietly. Even without news, the Taoist should have made arrangements long ago. Li Zhufeng had been worried for so long that he could no longer control his emotions. Covering his face, he wept and said sorrowfully, "You only speak comforting words. I cannot even see the Taoist master when I ask. Uncle's whereabouts are unknown. How could he still have a chance to live? Aside from Aunt, he has no brothers who truly care for him. The elders are all at the lake. If we juniors do not ask, how many people in these mountains will even remember him?" At these words, Li Zhuliuo lowered his head in silence, hiding his hands within his sleeves. Pang Yunqing, clad in green, immediately glanced at him. The atmosphere fell silent until a streak of purple lightning descended from the sky with rolling thunder. A robust man stepped down upon it. It was Li Xiaoda. He had inherited Li Chenghui's legacy. Though slightly affected this time, he was not injured and had even distinguished himself in battle. Now, full of vigor, he cupped his hands and said, "Brothers, the cultivators of Purple Smoke Gate have escorted us this far, but the northern cultivators are watching closely. Please return to the lake at once to prevent any mishap." Chapter 1452, Pavilion Viewing Faction, I. Everyone agreed as soon as Li Xiaoda spoke. Li Zhuliuo threw off his black robe, pressed a hand to his sword, and strode forward, quickly pulling ahead and returning to the lakeside first. Beside him, Pang Yunqing turned to offer comfort. People misspeak all the time. It wasn't aimed at anyone in particular. In his haste, Li Zhufeng had said that none of the brothers cared about Li Chengqi aside from Li Minggong, but beneath that, he was clearly pointing at Li Chenghui for ignoring family matters and going off to cultivate. There was no way Li Zhuliuo would miss that. What happened back then could not be called forgotten, only left unspoken. Now that Li Zhufeng had brought it up again, Li Zhuliuo held his tongue out of consideration for the man's grief, but he was far from pleased. He thought to himself, my going out to cultivate was approved and decided by the elders. I know some people think it's unfair, and some are even jealous, but I never expected even elder brother to misunderstand it. What is he trying to say? That my father didn't go to Mount Tangdao and doesn't care whether Li Chengqi lives or dies. My father is in seclusion, attempting a breakthrough. This happened so suddenly, how could he have possibly intervened? Pang Yunqing came from the long-established Pang family of Bamboo Creek Island under the Chunyi Dao's domain. As a direct lineage genius, his perspective was far from narrow. He reassured Li Zhuliuo, these days, even parents and children lack real affection. Once you're past 3 generations, how many can truly be called brothers? What he said was inappropriate. Don't take it to heart. Zai, it's hard to explain to you. The Li family isn't the same as the Pang family. Li Zhuliuo shook his head. After a brief moment of hesitation, he said, thinking about it now, 5th brother is the only one I find likable. Yet his aptitude barely meets the requirements for the Foundation establishment realm. We can't let anything happen to him. The two headed into the mountains together. Pang Yunqing shook his head with a smile and said, very different indeed. I've only heard he's a henpecked wastrel, yet you call him likable. They soon arrived at a mountain covered in gardenias. After politely asking someone to announce them, they passed through the woods with due respect and saw a figure seated above, bathed in golden light. The man leaned back in his seat, adorned in scaled armor and black boots. His golden eyes glowed faintly. A long, curved halberd rested across his knee. One hand ran along its shaft, holding a radiant light as if he were nurturing a Dharma artifact. At his side stood Li Jiangqian and Li Qiuan, speaking to each other in low voices. Li Zhuliuo hurriedly bowed and said respectfully, Zhuliuo greets the Taoist master. Even Li Zizhai would bow and address Li Ziming as Taoist master. As for Li Zhuliuo and Li Xiaowei, they had never been close growing up. They were merely distant family cousins, so he naturally did not dare address him as elder brother. He was at least able to lift his head and look. Pang Yunqing, however, did not dare raise his head at all. He simply bowed beside him and waited until the man above relaxed his expression and said, "Fourth brother is back, no need for formalities." Li Zhuliuo quickly replied, "I heard the Taoist master has achieved great success in your divine ability, so I brought Yunqing to pay respects, elder brother." Li Xiaowei nodded as a stir rose below. The crowd stepped forward one after another. The first was Li Zhufeng, his face streaked with tears. He knelt on the mountain and still offered his congratulations. "Congratulations, Taoist master, congratulations." Li Xiaowei loosened his grip, and the halberd in his hand vanished. Seeing his state, he helped him up and said softly, "Uncle Chenki's children were all lost in family affairs, and now he too has died in battle. Matters of lineage incense will be handled within the first lineage. The family will provide compensation." Fei Qingyi fled on the battlefield and caused uncle's death. He colluded with devil cultivators and Buddhist cultivators and has already been sent to Supreme Yang for punishment. The rest have been sent to Hui. There will be news soon. Li Zhufeng could only remain kneeling, weeping as he gave thanks. "My thanks, Taoist master. The Fei family deserves death. The Buddhist cultivators of Mount Zhaoxi also owe a blood debt." A cold light flashed in Li Xiaowei's eyes at the mention of the northern Buddhists. He said only, "Of course." Li Zhufeng bowed again, still crying, and withdrew to handle matters behind him. Li Xiaowei glanced around in silence. Those present all wore uneasy expressions and did not dare speak. Whether it was Chen Yang or Xunxin, all lowered their heads. Qi Juyan, as always, showed no reaction. The rest of the guest cultivators and Dharma protectors were visibly worried. Only Li Xiaoda stood grinding his teeth, his anger evident from the lightning flickering in his eyes as he muttered, "Those damned bald monks." Li Xiaowei turned and took his seat again as Li Zhuliuo spoke in a low voice. "Now that the Taoist master has achieved this, there should be a banquet as in previous years, but no need." Leaving aside whether the cultivators of Jiangnan had any mood to celebrate, Li Xiaowei himself had none. If this had been their first Purple Mansion cultivator, a banquet would have been inevitable. But the Li family was already a Purple Mansion realm immortal family, and there was no need to make a display. He continued softly, "The north has fallen. The riverbanks must be guarded. Deploy your people and secure the northern front. As for Glacial Cloud Peak." He paused and Li Jianqian immediately took over. "It's already arranged. The peak offices have been re-established, and personnel are being assigned accordingly." At these words, Li Xiaowei slowly raised his gaze and swept it across members of the Ren family and Chen family. He lifted a hand and instructed, "You all may go." The crowd dispersed in an orderly manner, turning into streams of light outside the mountain. Li Jianqian's expression grew colder. Li Qiuan said softly, "The fall of Mount Tangdao dealt a heavy blow, while Fei Qingyi set a terrible example. It's only natural they feel uneasy. Once the Buddhist cultivators reach the Three Streams region, what happened with Fei Qingyi may very well happen again." The Li family had not established peak offices for many years. In the past, news like this would have been met with excitement. New positions meant new benefits to divide, which was why the other families had eagerly piled onto the Fei family's downfall. While the Fei family had fallen, no one had expected Mount Tangdao to be breached. The White River Stream region had fallen into the hands of Buddhist cultivators, and the northern bank suddenly became a burden no one wanted. Though the north was unlikely to launch a full invasion, clashes and conflicts were inevitable. Thus the families and lineages all lost their enthusiasm. Li Jianqian replied coldly, "Exactly. They were the ones eager for positions on the northern bank in an attempt to grind the Fei family to dust. Now they're the same people shrinking back, afraid to act. First, they might lose their lives in battle. Second, they fear they or their descendants might end up like Fei Qingyi. The various clans have families to worry about, so they hesitate. As for the guest cultivators, many have no heirs. At most, they keep a wife or concubine by the lake and a small bit of property. They have nothing holding them back. And this is after the Fei family was severely punished. If only the ringleaders had been executed back then, they'd be celebrating now, thinking they'd still have a way out even if they went north." Even Li Qiuan could see the situation clearly. Someone like Li Jianqian, who always assumed the worst and trusted none of his subordinates, saw it all the more plainly. How could Li Xiaowei not know? His golden eyes were filled with gravity as he slowly rotated the jade cup on the table and said, "The Ren and Chen families are not like the Fei. Even if the situation collapses and someone defects to the north, we cannot touch them. As for the other families, they amount to nothing. There's no need to worry." Seeing him state it so plainly, Li Jianqian and the other fell silent. The Chen family and An family had long been the Li family's closest pillars, deeply tied to the four lineages. The Li family rarely married outside, with most unions happening within the lake. The old families, Tian, Su, Liu, Chen, and Du, had declined one after another. Only the Chen family and later than family remained prosperous and inseparable. Part of it was because their elders still lived, but more importantly, each generation produced geniuses and children with spiritual orifices, binding them firmly into the bloodline. To put it bluntly, even if Chen Yang were converted by Buddhist cultivators, what could the lake really do? His mother was Li Zicheng's sister, and Li Jianglong even had to call him uncle. Li Jianqian's own mother was from the N family, so what could he do but remain silent? As for Li Qiuan, faced with such a sensitive issue, she kept her head down. There were already whispers about her low birth within the lake. Normally she could shut herself away to cultivate, but now even a single word could stir rumors. Seeing them silent, Li Xiaowei took a sip of tea and said calmly, "As long as you understand, there's no need for me to say more. The Fei family can be dealt with harshly, but the remaining families must be handled with appeasement. The situation is still unclear. We'll see what the North does. You guys may leave." The two acknowledged and withdrew. Li Xiaowei rose, his expression slightly dark, and stepped through the great void, reappearing by the lakeside as he looked into the distance. Chapter 1453, Pavilion Viewing Faction, II. In the distance, brilliant light cascaded like a waterfall as the black radiance dissipated. Streaks of golden Dao light shot through the sky. Then a swath of heavenly light swept in from afar, passing through the formation and landing on the mountain. A violet shadow emerged from within, taking the form of a man in a deep blue Taoist robe. He carried a softly glowing sword in his arms and approached with a smile. It was Li Ziming and Yehui, arriving together. Seeing Li Xiaowei, the man showed a trace of surprise and cupped his hands. "I have long heard of your name." No one had expected this scene, but with Buddhist cultivators pressing White River stream, even bitter enemies would turn into brothers. Moreover, the two sides had long maintained an ambiguous relationship, and Yehui had just done them a favor. Li Xiaowei replied evenly, "Greetings, Senior Yehui." When Li Xiaowei had beaten Guan Gongxiao into fleeing in panic back then, Yehui had worn a dark expression. Now he showed no trace of awkwardness, his face full of delight as he offered congratulations and took a seat, smiling as he said, "You are a top-tier figure. I knew it long ago. Now that you've reached the Purple Mansion realm, you are a strong ally to us." Li Xiaowei gave a perfunctory response and cast a questioning look at Li Ziming, who immediately shook his head and said gravely, "Mount Tangdao has already been abandoned. It was established using formation plates to begin with, so it couldn't form any real barriers, and we couldn't risk disturbing the earth veins. It likely won't leave much trouble behind." Yehui sat to the side. He picked up the thread in a serious tone. "What's happening now cannot be avoided. I have some connections in the north and have received some information. Let me speak first. First, although the northern forces have not yet taken Mount Tangdao, the national preceptor of Zhao State, Wei Xunian, who is also the Dao master of the Dao of the Observation Transformation Heavenly Tower, has already been urgently recalled to the north to report to the Zhao Emperor. He has been granted the title of King of Han for his merits." He paused meaningfully before explaining. This Wei Xunian represents the Dao of the Observation Transformation Heavenly Tower and cultivates Veiled Yin. He once rose to prominence in the Great Liang era and is closely tied to the Purple Terrace Profound Pavilion sect, which follows Lesser Yang. Together, they are known as the Pavilion Viewing Faction. It is said that the Devil Monarch of old came from the Purple Terrace Profound Pavilion sect. Li Ziming frowned slightly, his pupils dilating. Hearing that name, a chill ran through his heart. Pavilion viewing, the divine technique of pavilion view, refining within fire. All Dao lineages had their origins. How could Li Ziming not immediately recognize the words pavilion viewing the moment it was spoken? The divine technique of pavilion view, refining within fire, he possessed had come from Taoist master Changxi, from which he had gained greatly. It belonged to the profound Peak Gate Dao lineage, one acknowledged by Qiuqi himself as a Tongxuan Dao lineage. That meant the pavilion viewing faction must be Tongxuan. With a bit more thought, it even led straight to the Lesser Yang Devil Monarch of the Great Liang. Then was the widely known threefold Lesser Yang truly just an immortal devil war, or was there a deeper struggle between Dao lineages beneath it? Immortal Yings of the Green Pine's supreme Yang Dao lineage had issued an immortal decree, openly and uprightly presented before the Liang Emperor, true monarch Chuoba Xuanten. Then the Lesser Yang Devil Monarch Que Lei, leader of the pavilion viewing faction of the Tongxuan Dao lineage, had been captured and split into three before all cultivators under heaven, leaving the world to remember. But what stance had Mount Luoxia taken at the time? That event had shaken the world. Countless Dao lineages had vanished, and countless secret techniques silenced. Yet the name of the Lesser Yang Devil Monarch Que Li was still known across the lands. The supreme Yang Dao lineage took pride in it and suppressed the Western Plateau year after year. Now Wei Xuanian, Dao master of the Dao of the Observation Transformation Heavenly Tower of the Tongshuan Dao lineage, had struck and shattered the embattled Green Pine Supreme Yang Dao lineage. How times had changed, to have grudges returned in kind. Yet he had been urgently recalled without the chance to vent that grievance. Li Ziming raised his brows and looked at Li Xiaowei. The golden-eyed youth seemed calm on the surface, but in that exchanged glance, everything was understood without words. Yehui seemed unaffected, as if his earlier words had been casual. He continued quietly, "The one replacing him is a Buddhist general, Maha Facheng of the great Mahayana Dharma realm. He has undergone 5 reincarnations and has been tasked with governing Jiangbei." Li Ziming fell silent for a moment. Li Xiaowei said softly, "For something as significant as defeating the Southern Supreme Yang Dao lineage, the Buddhist cultivators would insist on taking control. Recalling Wei Xuanian is no surprise, but the great Mahayana Dharma realm and the Compassion Dao have never been on good terms. How can they act together?" Yehui snorted, the usual tactics. When have Buddhist cultivators ever truly gotten along? The emptiness Dao may behave in front of the great desire Dao, give them the chance, and Zhelu would wipe them out one by one. He took a sip of tea and continued. Senior Luing struck down Pai Jia of the great desire Dao. Whether he has fallen or not is unclear, but Zhelu must be overjoyed. The Maha of the Sea of Desire cannot head south, so with no oversight, Zhelu has already become active again, harboring even darker intentions toward the great desire Dao. Don't think that Senior is simple-minded just because he is a sword immortal. He sees things clearly. That strike landed exactly where it hurt. Otherwise, why would the Compassion Dao step in so easily to mediate, and even force Wei Xuanian to act? Though Yehui walked the line between righteous and wicked, he clearly admired a great sword immortal like Luing and did not hide his praise. He let out a soft scoff but said no more on it, continuing, "We cultivators of Jiangbei have received news from the north. Gao Fu, the king of Boli of Qi, will soon travel to Changshui Marsh to visit Changyun. As for what they will discuss, that's hard to say." Li Ziming took a sip of tea and said, "It's actually not the Lotus Temple, but the Gao family further north." "Lotus Temple?" Yehui sneered. "With all the Dao factions pushing north, the Lotus Temple has kept its head down like a quail. It's already fortunate they're not being pressured. What thought would they have of moving south? Maha Jinlian has been summoned to the Dayang Mountain Dharma Assembly and has no chance of returning. Did you know that Facheng's position originally belonged to the Lotus Temple? Otherwise, how would the great Mahayana Dharma realm, which had no involvement in the south, suddenly send down a Maha out of nowhere? From what I heard from fellow Taoists in the north, those few who stand at the highest positions have reached a rare consensus. Jiangbei must fall into northern hands, whether in name or in actual control. In the process, who struggles, who plays tricks, and who truly puts in effort will all be laid bare. This is no longer a stage where everyone relies on their own ability. Chapter 1454, Do Not Doubt If It Is Lost, I. Yehui's words came straight from the heart, falling coldly over the mountain and silencing everything around. Li Xiaowei's eyes landed on him as he said softly, "Senior is remarkably well informed." Still his words echoed through the mountains. Yehui lowered his head to sip his tea, while Li Ziming silently tightened his grip on his cup and took over. Now that all sides have revealed their reactions, the North's true intent is clear. If the Supreme Yang Dao lineage had known earlier, they would not have suffered such a disastrous defeat. When he finished, Li Xiaowei stared steadily at the Taoist master before him. Yi parted his lips slightly and let out a silent, mocking laugh before replying, "Knew early. Of the southern cultivators, some knew and some did not. Some hoped for luck and some sensed it quietly. Yet in the end, they all went to Mount Tangdao. I will not say more, but you claim there was a path in the south that did not know. That is impossible." A warm, sunlit smile suddenly spread across his face as he reminded them, "Fellow Taoists, Hangzhou is a manifest seat in this age." Yehui truly was bold beyond measure to say such cold and direct words. He dared to say it, yet few would dare to hear it. He was almost openly pointing out that a true monarch stood behind the Hangzhou Dao who had watched everything unfold without intervening, quietly steering the situation. The 6 sons of Chang'eming studied at Green Pine Temple and inherited the Supreme Yang Dao lineage. Their sect had produced 6 true monarchs and established their Dao lineage under the closely allied Moonlight Origin Mansion. 3 of them were active to this day, with traces of their presence in the world. Taixu and Teiyu have fallen, leaving the most inconspicuous among them, true monarch Teizhu. Over the years, the Li family had gathered extensive information and maintained long ties with the Supreme Yang Dao lineage. They had some understanding of nearly every true monarch, except for this one, true monarch Teizhu, who had remained silent from beginning to end, as if he had never acted at all. But as soon as those words were spoken, Li Ziming felt a slight jolt in his heart, and Hang Xing's words resurfaced in his mind. Lin Jianqi was willing to die for this. How many in this world could be like him? If the Hangzhou Dao had truly foreseen all this, then did Qi know as well, that Taoist master of Great Ziyuqi Temple, what exactly had he stood before Mount Tangdao for? Li Ziming sighed inwardly. At almost the same moment, Yehui paused slightly and let out a faint sigh as he said, if Cheng Xiao truly dares to act, it will not just be a conflict with Hangzhou Dao alone. He will be facing the entire supreme Yang Dao lineage of Jiangnan, though his cultivation is extremely high. South cannot deal with him at the moment. There will be no shortage of friction on the margins. White River Stream will certainly be lost. I came specifically to meet you. I will not say more, but there will be contact in the future. I hope our two families can set aside past grievances and support each other. That goes without saying. Li Ziming's expression was solemn, but he still needed to clarify what had been said earlier to avoid any misunderstanding, so he immediately replied, whether a fruition attainment manifests or not is not for one person to decide. The Hangzhou Dao may be formidable, but Hangzhou Dao's spirit items are rare in the world. It is hard to say. This is not something to be asked lightly. Yehui glanced at the gardenia flower that had fallen before him and replied, of course, I was only speaking casually. The power of a true monarch is immense, far beyond what a minor cultivator like me can define, but hearing your words reminded me of a line I once read when studying the Dao lineage. It says a manifest seat does not vanish. Do not doubt if it is lost. The lower cultivators must be diligent and frugal. The proof lies in the intercalary's surplus position. When a metallic essence fruition attainment shines across heaven and earth and flourishes throughout the world, there must be an exalted being occupying that seat. But if a fruition attainment grows dim and its spiritual chi is cut off, one must not assume that the great figure has fallen, because if he wills it, the fruition attainment will dim and its spiritual chi will cease. Lower cultivators can only know which true monarch wishes to be known and simply cultivate as best they can. But for people like us, without generations of Dao lineage inheritance, without direct transmission between master and disciple, without detailed records or structured branches of practice, and without comparing the power of fruition attainments across centuries and millennia, how could we possibly know which fruition attainment is truly shining across heaven and earth and flourishing in the world? Yehui let out a grunt, a hint of jest creeping into his expression. Then he burst into mocking laughter, rising to his feet as he laughed and stepping into the great void to leave. Only his cold words echoed across the mountain. So what it means is, creatures like us, who do not even count as lower cultivators, should stop trying to attain a seat. He turned into a stream of violet light and drifted away, leaving Li Ziming and Li Xiaowei seated at the table, their expressions grave, with nothing to say for a time. Only after a long while did Li Xiaowei take a sip of tea and said, it seems Yehui harbors ambitions to become a true monarch and also carries a deep dissatisfaction with his Dao lineage background. Yehui was different from Li Ziming and Li Xiaowei. The Li family was known to be a family of imperial descendants, and the bright Yang Dao was widely recognized. Li Xiaowei and Li Ziming both knew clearly who occupied the fruition attainment above them and what their situation was. Even if they could not predict how things would change in the future, they still had a foundation to rely on. However, Yehui's Dao lineage came from a grotto heaven of the Daoxuan Dao. Though his cultivation method was refined and powerful, and his spirit artifacts were decent, he lacked backing and had no understanding of the struggles surrounding the capital guard above him. Even with opportunities that most Purple Mansion realm cultivators would envy, he still felt uncertain and uneasy about attaining a seat. At this moment, Li Xiaowei was beginning to understand his motives. If not for ambition, why would he be stirring things up in Jiangbei? The mountain gate of the capital Immortal Dao has cost him great effort and is certainly valuable, but the risks are only growing. Could he not simply lead the capital Immortal Dao away from the center of this storm? This is nothing more than a desire to climb higher, securing Jiangbei early so he can claim a foothold in the contest between North and South. Whether dealing with the South or the North, he seeks to gather more information about the greater situation and the Dao. Li Ziming had already reached the same conclusion and said, judging by how he spoke, he has already built quite a network in the North. He has been planning this for a long time. That is understandable. To put it bluntly, there are few in the Foundation establishment realm who do not dream of the Purple Mansion realm, and few in the Purple Mansion realm who do not set their sights on fruition attainment. The path to ascension is more enticing than the finest nectar. Li Ziming let out a sigh, and Li Xiaowei lowered his gaze slightly. The two said no more. In tacit understanding, they stepped into the great void together, drifting across the lake before reappearing within the inner formation above. Yet the hall was dim, and a pagoda stood at its center. You have been there, Li Ziming asked quietly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes as he looked at him twice, then hesitated, the green talisman. Correct, Li Xiaowei finally showed a trace of a smile as he replied, I have already received it. I obtained the illuminating sun and moon talisman. He briefly explained his talisman Qi. Li Ziming stroked his beard and nodded repeatedly, full of admiration. He laughed a few times and shook his head. It seems I will not need to risk my life like this in the future. Li Xiaowei immediately turned serious and bowed, saying, "These past years have been hard on you, senior." Li Ziming did not dwell on such matters. He waved his hand with a smile to cut him off and immediately asked what concerned him most, your cultivation. Li Xiaowei smiled faintly and replied, that talisman transformed into green radiance, raising my cultivation. The heaven venerating gate was completed in an instant within my Shenyang acupoint. Chapter 1455, Do not doubt if it is lost, I. Li Ziming stared at him blankly and his expression turned strange. A mix of surprise and awkwardness appeared on his face as he asked, so that means, you and I are now at the same level. Not so, Li Xiaowei shook his head. The Taoist master in the white golden Taoist robe immediately understood, slapping his palm in frustration as he replied, that is true, my injuries are still far from light. How could I be considered at the same level as you? Li Xiaowei looked slightly awkward. After a brief moment he replied, it is not about the Dharma body. I obtained a green talisman which elevated one divine ability. The remaining energy was not used up, so it condensed again into pure cultivation and was sealed within Shenyang acupoint. Once I cultivate the next divine ability, I can draw it out again with a thought. Oh, Li Ziming turned and sat down. After thinking for a moment, he let out a light laugh. After all, it is a green talisman. But he quickly reacted, exclaiming in surprise, if it can raise your cultivation, would that not instantly bring all 6 cycles to completion? Have you cultivated radiance under heaven? Have you decided on that? Li Ziming had heard Tinglin explain that radiance under heaven was best used for the final divine ability. He himself had no particular thoughts, but Li Xiaowei was different. When he asked, Li Xiaowei shook his head and said with a smile, of course I remember the advice. He then turned serious. I cultivated sovereign in peril, but I have not used the green radiance within the Shenyang mansion. I was just about to discuss this matter with you, senior. First, my heaven-venerating gate is already complete by relying on talisman Qi. Refining a divine ability is subtle, and each person's mastery differs. It is a personal matter and hard to measure, so it is not a major concern. But if I continue to use it, I might rapidly condense a second divine ability. That would be entirely different. It would be impossible to conceal in battle. His expression grew solemn. I may have some destiny on my side, but no matter what, I could never achieve a second divine ability in just a few days. If others saw that, they might suspect I am the reincarnation of the Wei's emperor. Moreover, all sides are already watching me. If something so far beyond their expectations happens, it will surely bring disaster. Li Ziming nodded heavily as Li Xiaowei continued. Therefore, in my view, I should use this time to cultivate on my own. Once I forge the second divine ability, I can then use the talisman Qi to bring it swiftly to completion. That would be the safest approach and the best way to make full use of the green talisman. Good, Li Ziming stroked his beard and replied, it is best if you arrange it yourself. His tone grew more complex as he asked, since you mentioned the arrangements of all parties, our family is becoming increasingly entangled in the matter of the Wei's emperor. What is your view? Li Xiaowei seemed to have already thought about it. His gaze darkened slightly as he said softly, the struggle at that level is beyond both me and the family. We have no right to question it. In the end, whether we follow the arrangements of the Dragon Clan and cultivate through reincarnation, or are forced into a corner and compelled to break through, none of it is decided yet. For now, there is only one thing to do, strengthen ourselves and build up our power. Li Ziming nodded silently. After thinking for a long while, he took out a piece of dark jade from his sleeve and said, you are still using a Dharma artifact, which is hardly fitting. The viewing pavilion has long been completed. Take this portion of spiritual essence and use it, so you can obtain a proper weapon sooner. Li Xiaowei had naturally considered this already. He reply. After a moment of thought, in my earlier fight with Hellion Wumeng, this Dharma artifact of mine was damaged. I have long wanted to repair it, but our lake region has always lacked in the art of refining. We do not have top-level talent, so I can only nurture it slowly myself. Although Zhangzong has studied it for years and achieved some results, he still cannot produce something at the level of a spirit embryo. We will need to find someone. That is not difficult. Ningguan has yet to be found, and it is inconvenient to rely on Chu Minglian, but Purple Smoke Gate or Ziyuqui Dao Gate can both be approached now. Li Ziming chuckled, then suddenly remembered something. He quickly took out a small jade bottle which had streams of pale blue-white qi swirling within. He showed it to Li Xiaowei and said, take a look at this. It also came from within heaven and earth. There were 5 bottles in total. There were actually a few more left behind in between heaven and earth, but Li Xiaowei had been focused on cultivation and had not examined them closely. Now that he looked at it, he judged and said, "It seems to be some kind of spiritual qi, related to the Supreme Yin. If one were to ask about it, I suspect only Chunyi Dao in the world would know." Li Ziming shook his head with a hint of frustration and replied, "I am aware of that. In fact, I have even refined a major pill of the Supreme Yin Dao. It would be extremely valuable to Chunyi Dao. But whether it is the spiritual qi or the spirit pill, Supreme Yin has vanished from the world. If such things appear in our hands without reason, it will only arouse suspicion." Li Xiaowei nodded and said, "Did we not also obtain news of a cave dwelling within heaven and earth? There is no need to rush this. Once you have recovered and the northern situation stabilizes, you can make a trip. It would be best to find a suitable excuse and settle the matter." Li Ziming understood what he meant. This was a sensitive time. It was not suitable for Li Xiaowei to travel, nor could he inexplicably head out to the outer sea and pinpoint a hidden cave dwelling in some strait. Only Li Ziming could quietly go and retrieve the items. "All right." Li Ziming nodded inwardly and took out a pill furnace from his sleeve that shone in gold and ivory hues. It was the treasure-relevant furnace. He immediately smiled and said, "I still owe Master Dingyang a batch of serpent water suspension powder. This is a good chance to refine it." The realm of sun and moon radiance had far denser spiritual energy, making it a better place for alchemy. Unfortunately, serpent water suspension powder was a pit water suspension type pill, and its nature did not align with balanced harmony, so he immediately took out the jade box given to him by Master Dingyang. When he opened the jade box, he found a palm-sized scale, black-blue in color and faintly glowing. It was the main ingredient, the Kangzhu serpent scale. The other auxiliary ingredients had also been prepared by Master Dingyang, so he could begin refining immediately. At a glance, the quality of this spirit material was excellent, prompting Li Ziming to think to himself, "Master Dingyang wants 6 pills per batch. I can certainly achieve that, but any extra pills would also be pit water pills. They are rather useless to my family. Their applications are too narrow and tied too specifically to certain Dao lineages. Unless there is a specific need, their value is not high." Having spent so many years on this, he valued Purple Mansion Realm spirit materials greatly. Taking a closer look, this scale was not only of exceptional quality, it also seemed to have been taken recently. Scales were not like other materials. Even if Master Dingyang did not have a stable source, this at least suggested he possessed more than one. Li Ziming's mind turned, and an idea formed. If I can make this work, I might as well maintain long-term dealings with him. If I refine enough of these pills over time, I can gather the surplus into a set of 6. That would effectively give me 1 Kangzhu serpent scale in return. Then it would no longer be useless. It would be a proper spirit material, something I could trade with other cultivators. With that thought, his interest surged. He immediately began refining on the spot. Flames shot upward, true fire blazed fiercely, and shifting light filled the hall. Meanwhile, Li Xiaowei took his leave from the hall, his expression slightly heavy as he thought, "It is time I paid a visit to the Demon Den." Chapter 1456, Profound Supreme Yin I. In the eastern sea, Chunyi Dao Gate. A streak of white light sped across the sea, scattering soft and gentle Supreme Yin radiance. The young Taoist wore a flowing white robe patterned with waves and crescent moons. He looked ethereal and unrestrained, with an air of effortless elegance. Yet his expression was far from good, and even seemed somewhat Su. Pressed, there were no visible injuries on his body, but his divine ability had dimmed, clearly showing he had just withdrawn from a fierce battle. This man was none other than Taoist Master Cheheng, who had rushed to reinforce Mount Tangdao. Taoist Master Cheheng was among the newest generation of Purple Mansion Realm cultivators in Chunyi Dao Gate. He was also a symbol of its peak in the past 300 years, with 4 Purple Mansion Realm cultivators in a gate. As a top-tier genius with a sharp mind, how could he fail to see the current situation? His Chunyi Dao bore the title of Supreme Yin Inheritance, yet also claimed to be part of the Supreme Yang Dao lineage. Yet the Changming 6 lineages of the Supreme Yang Dao lineage in Jiangnan had never truly acknowledged them. Years ago, they had even sought to push them aside. Although the Chunyi Dao Patriarch Jiquan had clearly originated from Green Pine Temple, whenever this was mentioned back then, those of the Supreme Yang Dao lineage would either fall silent or dismiss it as rumor. After all, Patriarch Jiquan's Dao title did not align, and he had never reached the level of a true monarch. The cultivators of Chunyi Dao Gate were by nature reserved and rarely argued outwardly, but it was impossible for them not to harbor some resentment. But the Supreme Yang Dao lineage had gradually softened its stance in recent years. Chunyi Dao Gate had also entered its peak. When Cheheng had ascended to the purple smoke-blessed land, Tinglin had personally acknowledged him as a fellow disciple, which undoubtedly let him vent long-held frustration. Though Chehang said he bore no grudge at all, he still gave his full support without holding back. His expression remained solemn, but inwardly he could not help but feel satisfied. How did you treat my Tao back then? And now, how does my Tao repay you? This is the magnanimity of the true Supreme Yang orthodoxy. Every time you call us fellow disciples now, you're slapping your own faces for refusing to acknowledge and belittling our elders in the past. Yet satisfaction was only that. After a single great battle, Qiuqi's fall still weighed heavily on Chehang's heart, leaving him at a loss for words. Moreover, while he himself had done his utmost in the battle at Mount Tangdao, Chunyi Dao Gate as a whole had not. They had only fulfilled the bare minimum of obligation to the orthodox Tao. If the old Taoist master does not act, Mount Tangdao will be impossible to resolve. He is already aged, relying only on a few Supreme Yin secret techniques to preserve his life. How could we of Chunyi Dao ignore the threats from Crimson Reef and Jingyi Mountain and send the old Taoist master there? Heavy thoughts weighing him down, he continued flying and soon reached the mountain's edge. There he saw another Taoist master arriving on the wind, seemingly waiting for him. Hope flickered across his face as he stepped forward with a smile. Brother Zai Chang. So it's Senior Jian, what a rare guest. One addressed the other as brother, the other as senior, revealing the difference in background and age. Chehang cupped his hands slightly, and the two walked into the mountains together. Sitting at a table, they reminisced for a while. After 15 minutes, Jian shook his head and said, "This time I came from the northern sea to ask about a place to settle." Chehang's expression changed as he asked, "How has it come to this?" Senior conducts himself uprightly and is well known among the Purple Mansion realm cultivators. How would those 5 gates dare? Jian shook his head silently. Though he appeared advanced in years, he carried no airs as he replied, "It is not entirely because of them. The 5 gates of the palace are orthodox at their roots. I do not provoke them and they have no interest in me. Brother, you do not know, it is due to something else. Pit water is now unrestrained in Kangzhou, flooding across all regions. I cultivate radiant fire, which makes it completely unsuitable for me. I had originally thought to endure day by day, but it only worsens with each passing day. A few days ago, even the 6 manifest radiant fire on my Bayer mountain nearly lost its spiritual chi. If not for the formation's spiritual flames holding it in place, Bayer Mountain would have reverted into a pit water domain." His words caused a cold light to flash in Chehang's eyes. Lowering his brows, he asked, "Then what does Senior intend?" Jian said, "When I was young, I knew an elder who cultivated pit water. I have already given my mountain to his descendants and plan to relocate to the Eastern Sea." Chehang understood, but Jian continued with growing enthusiasm. "I passed through the Unison Sea just as the assembly at Dayang Mountain had ended and ran into an acquaintance. He said that he had heard some good news from a report within the Great Desire Dao. There are traces of the Great Radiant Book at M. Ungei's marsh. It belongs to a Purple Mansion realm immortal family." Chehang replied casually, taking a sip of tea, "I know. It is not just the Great Radiant Book, but also the Heaven-venerating Gate and even a whole Pill Dao lineage. I hear none of them are of low grade." "What?" Jian asked with some urgency. "I heard it is an immortal family that produced 2 Purple Mansion realm cultivators within 100 years. Judging by the timeline, they were already cultivating before breaking through to Purple Mansion realm. Every one of those inheritances is rare. They must have obtained a Dao collection." Chehang remained calm as he poured tea and replied, "Bright Yang and Radiant Fire, you are not the first to notice this. Where do you think those things came from? That family has a genius blessed with a Bright Yang destiny. A Bright Yang destiny." At this point, a faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "As for this acquaintance, how many Buddhist cultivators can truly be trusted? Senior, you should be careful." Jian nodded in realization, though the hand resting on his cup remained relaxed. Clearly, he was not surprised at all and had come deliberately to probe for information. Chehang saw through his senior and shook his head as he said, "You cultivate radiant fire. In theory, you should get close and build ties. There would be benefits, but there are risks as well." Before he could finish, the jade pendant at his waist glowed faintly. Chehang's expression immediately changed. He excused himself and rose as a streak of supreme yin light, descending into a formation filled with drifting snow. There he saw a jade pool bathed in pale moonlight, its waters rippling. 2 people sat by the pool, waiting for one more. Seated in the main position was a middle-aged man in moon-white Taoist robes, his own family elder Taoist master Fuxuan. The guest, with blue eyes and green robes, appeared carefree and otherworldly, with a profound cultivation. Chehang's eyes lit up as he thought, the one surnamed Kai has come. The man before him was none other than Grand Taoist Master Kai Buzi of the Azure Pond sect. Standing to the side was the elder surnamed Zai who had gone with him. His face was pale and he looked exhausted, yet there was relief and joy in his expression. Ever since Kai Buzi had taken members of Chunyi Dao Gate to the Eastern Sea, Taoist Master Fuxuan had not gone a single day without thinking of it, mentioning it several times. Now that he had returned early, Chehang was overjoyed and said more politely, "So it is the Grand Taoist Master." No one mentioned the matter of Mount Tangdao. Kai Buzi clearly did not care. Sitting there with a smile, he shook his head and said, "Since you have come, I will not waste words. Please return my 2 treasures." Chunyi Daogate had no intention of coveting his spirit artifacts, so they were quickly brought out and placed on the table. Chehang held them as he stood at the side. Kai Buzi glanced at them and nodded calmly. The 2 Purple Mansion realm cultivators fixed their gaze on him. Clearly, if he did not produce something worthwhile this time, Chunyi Daogate would not return the items so easily. Kai Buzi said leisurely, "I should have returned long ago, but when I was leaving, that place was discovered by a merciful one." Both grew tense. Taoist Master Fuxuan frowned at once, suspecting an excuse. Chehang glanced at the elder beside him and saw the same look of deep concern. Only then did Kai Buzi smile and say, "I will not say more for now. Take a good look." With a light flick of his sleeve, he took out a stone box. The box was carved from white Angelica azure stone, a rare spirit item seen mostly in ancient times and often used to store high-grade Purple Mansion realm spirit items. At the sight of it, Fuxuan nodded slightly, while Chehang lowered his gaze, already feeling a trace of disappointment. If one were to ask what Chunyi Daogate desired most now, it was undoubtedly Supreme Yin Moonlight. Chapter 1457, Profound Supreme Yin, II. The flourishing state of Chunyi Daogate in recent years was closely tied to Supreme Yin Moonlight. This form of spiritual qi had long gone extinct and could only be found in ancient ruins and hidden troves. Even then, very little had fallen into Chunyi Dao's hands. As more secret realms closed over the years, the amount circulating among Purple Mansion realm cultivators grew ever scarcer and more precious. Precisely because Chunyi Daogate was so complete, it meant their consumption of Supreme Yin Moonlight was immense. A single Grand Taoist Master required at least 4 portions. Though Chunyi Daogate possessed second-rate methods that could still achieve divine abilities, they inevitably fell short in comparison. Within the Dao lineage, only the old Taoist Master Yuansheng had cultivated using the leftover Supreme Moonlight, and even then he had only used 1 portion. Before him, Fuxuan had also obtained a portion of Supreme Yin Moonlight by chance, yet it only sufficed to form his second divine ability. As for the rest, he had no such fortune. At the time of Chehang and his grandfather Taoist Master Guanghu, this spiritual qi no longer existed within the Dao lineage. After much deliberation, Taoist Master Guanghu had cultivated Mansion Water instead. Chehang himself not only practiced a lesser technique, he had never even seen Supreme Yin Moonlight. It felt extravagantly wasteful to use such a thing for qi cultivation. Using it to break through to Purple Mansion realm would be more fitting. The box was of high grade, but if it truly contained Supreme Yin Moonlight, it would be stored in a jade vial. It would never be placed in such a box. But while Chehang was still lost in disappointment, Kai Buzi had already placed a hand on the jade box and flicked out a trace of aura. Clang! Chehang suddenly felt a surge of cold qi shoot upward. The white-robed Taoist in front of him rose abruptly, his breathing turning heavy. With a dull thud, one hand slammed onto the jade table, stopping just a finger's breadth away from the box. His eyes snapped upward, his expression turned grave, yet his gaze carried near uncontrolled ecstasy and shock. He stared straight at Kai Buzi, as if he might erupt at any moment. "Fellow Taoist Buzi," his voice was slightly hoarse, his eyes faintly red, "may I take a closer look?" Fuxuan had trained in the sword for years, and his hands were well kept, slender and refined beneath the drifting snowlight. Yet these very hands, which had slain countless devil cultivators and Buddhist cultivators without the slightest hesitation, now trembled faintly upon the table, as if he could not resist grabbing the jade box. The green-eyed man seated across from him showed no surprise at all. From beginning to end, he sat calmly at the table, not even moving a finger, and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, calm yourself first." Everything had happened in a flash. Only now did Chehang stare blankly at the jade box. That trace of aura was so faint that it had vanished in an instant. It was clearly something only the man before him could perceive. Clang! Fuxuan let out a breath. The hand that had moved toward the spirit sword at his waist slowly relaxed. He removed the sword and set it aside, yet his eyes could no longer leave the jade box as he said, "This matter is too important. I had no choice." Even though Kai Buzi made no move, and the treasure before him seemed within reach, even enough to justify keeping the 2 spirit artifacts, Fuxuan merely sat back down. Only his eyes refused to close. Though Kai Buzi appeared completely in control, inwardly he was truly startled, the golden branch of laurel. So this is how formidable this spirit item is. After all, it had been used in baskets in that grotto heaven, with no need for supervision. A single maid could carry basket after basket and deliver them freely to the various halls. It was hard for Kai Busey to reconcile that with Fuxuan's current excitement, so he simply stroked his beard and said with a smile, "It seems you recognize this item as well. To be blunt, in that entire cave dwelling, this is the only treasure truly worthy of the name." Fuxuan let out a deep sigh and his eyes were filled with lingering regret. He said, even if that cave dwelling was not left by an ancestor, it must have belonged to a great cultivator of the ancient supreme Yin Dao. This item has long vanished from the world. Calling it a treasure is not enough to describe it. Oh. Kai Busey let a probing look slip. With a light flick of his finger, his divine ability manifested. The lid of the stone box gradually turned transparent, revealing a laurel branch inside. White blossoms dotted its length, surrounded by a hazy glow. The cut surface of the branch bore fine golden spiral patterns that gave off a chilling aura. Fuxuan's mind was fixed on the object in his hands. He spoke without hesitation, deep longing in his eyes. This item is called the profound supreme yin white laurel branch. It must be an artifact from ancient times, even rarer than supreme yin moonlight. Since it involved Dao lineage matters, he dared not say more. Kai Busey nodded quietly, repeating the name in his mind several times as his surprise continued to mount. Yet he did not push the jade box forward. Fuxuan immediately understood and turned his head slightly. Chang'er. He had actually called out Chehang by name, showing how urgent he was. Chehang did not dare be careless. Holding the two spirit artifacts, he looked toward Kai Busey. Seeing the man shake his head, Fuxuan was not surprised and asked, "This is?" Kai Busey said softly, "This is what I mentioned earlier. A merciful one saw it." Fuxuan's expression darkened at once. Clearly, Hien Ao had concerns and killing intent arose. Fortunately, Kai Busey continued, "Fortunately, its cultivation was not high. I have already dealt with it in secret." Good, Kai Busey was a grand Taoist master. His methods of killing were certainly not as simple as sending someone back to the Buddhist land. Fuxuan visibly relaxed and said with feeling, "As expected of you, fellow Taoist, one can truly be at ease." The two clearly had a personal connection, perhaps dating back to their younger years. Kai Busey's expression turned serious as he replied, "However, the other party belongs to the Compassion Dao. I cannot afford to entangle with them now." He reached down to his waist and took out a golden case. Something inside clinked faintly, perhaps fragments of a treasure artifact. Fuxuan accepted it without hesitation and said, "This will discreetly lead the Compassion Dao to deduce that it was our Chunyi Dao Gate who did the killing. It will not fall on you." Kai Busey nodded with a faint smile. Both sides understood that Kai Busey did not care about such minor grudges. In truth, this was a way to shift the matter of the cave dwelling onto Chunyi Dao Gate. Even if it was discovered later and someone attempted to seize it, Kai Busey would not be left unable to defend himself. But Kai Busey's intentions went beyond that. He had his own calculations. "I need to make offerings, but it cannot be too obvious. Who repeatedly targets merciful ones without reason? I have already killed so many. Without clear gains, it would surely arouse suspicion." From his perspective, this was merely a convenient opportunity to legitimately eliminate another merciful one. By exploiting the timing, he not only resolved his cultivation issue, but also gained the chance to perform another offering. He still did not yield. His hand pressed lightly on the jade box, his gaze turning serious. At last, his true intent was revealed. His voice was firm, declaring his willingness to pay any price. "I intend to cultivate another Dao, to seek a way of survival through reincarnation. I also need your Chunyi Dao Gate to introduce me to Taoist Master Puyu of Pinglai." Chapter 1458, The Method of Seeking Dao I. Fuxuan fell briefly silent, seeming troubled. He lifted his cup, only to realize in his fluster he had not poured any tea. Taoist Master Chehang at his side stepped in to smooth things over. "I do not know where Grand Taoist Master obtained this information, but Pinglai has been sealed off for many years with no news. Taoist Master Puyu is nowhere to be found either. Our Chunyi Dao Gate has little contact with Pinglai." Kai Busey shook his head. Since he had asked, he clearly had some confidence. He said softly, "As long as Senior Yuansheng still lives, there must be a way." Fuxuan finally broke his silence and answered, "I do not know how you came by this information, but rebuilding one's cultivation is no small matter. Let alone you, even when Senior Yunwu personally went to Pinglai to ask, Taoist Master Puyu still refused to act. It would be best not to place too much hope in it." He paused briefly, then looked seriously at the green-eyed man before him and said, "Moreover, attaining a divine ability, registering one's name with the underworld's judiciary, then descending into the nine nether to restore life to those who died unnatural deaths comes at a tremendous cost. Without a dedicated Dao lineage, who could accomplish such a thing? The Taos of the Supreme Shaman and the Merging Owl have yet to return, and souls do not manifest. You know how difficult this is without me needing to say more. Kai Busey smiled and shook his head as he replied, "You are mistaken, fellow Taoist. Who knows what the future holds? Who can say whether these two Taos will return?" He raised his brows, a relaxed look appearing on his face, and continued, "When Liang fell and Zhao rose, before the fruition of Yue cultivating returned to its position, whoever thought much of formation plates? How fast was Great Void traversal then, and what is it now? Before Upper Azure Metal transformation and before Golden One attained the Tao, who could have imagined Zheng and Dewey metals shifting once and then shifting again? What about 50 years from now, or 100? Kai Busey's ambition was immense. He was determined to become a true monarch, erase his name from all records, and let the world cultivate along the path he left behind. Only then would his life be complete. Even as he spoke of Yue cultivating and Taiyuan attaining the Tao, he restrained the restless, surging ambition within his heart. Within 100 years, there would surely be celestial signs of borrowing the mansion and slipping free from the pristine spring. Kai Busey smiled and said, "I cultivate pristine water, not metal virtue. I am myself, and Yuanwu is Yuanwu. Just let me meet him. Whether it succeeds or not, whatever I may ask, it will not involve you." Lev. Ukshuan looked at him deeply, but he could not find it in himself to agree with Kai Busey's predictions. He simply shook his head inwardly. Whether those two Taos return is not for anyone to decide. After all these years, has the underworld's judiciary never considered restoring them? The time simply has not come, and the right candidates have yet to appear. Outwardly, however, he nodded and said, "Very well, I will have an answer within 3 months. If it fails, consider it as my Tao owing you a favor." At that, Kai Busey readily released his grip. Cheheng immediately stepped forward and presented the miniature cauldron and the string of ink-black beads. Having been apart from their master for a long time, both treasures shimmered with restless light. Kai Busey took back his rain-viewing precious cauldron and ink jade from Cheheng. Meanwhile, Fuxuan picked up the jade box with great excitement, looking almost at a loss. Good, good, Kai Busey simply smiled as he watched Fuxuan and said, "I will wait nearby. I will come again in 3 months." With that, he flicked his sleeve. His form turned into a streak of light, passed through the formation, and vanished into the great void. The moment Kai Busey left, Fuxuan could no longer remain composed. He shot to his feet, clutching the jade box tightly as he headed into the cave dwelling, saying in a low voice, "Guard this place, get everything clearly." Cheheng immediately stood guard at the cave entrance, carefully questioning the elder about Kai Busey's secret realm. Fuxuan moved swiftly inward, going deeper and deeper until he soon reached the innermost chamber, where he saw a mirror gleaming with silver light. It was the Supreme Circuit Spirit Mirror. The silver light was reflected across the ground, forming a calm, moon-white illusion. It contained a pale expanse, no more than a dozen steps across, not even as large as the courtyard of a wealthy household. Inside, there was a single table and a chair. An old man stood by the table, quietly studying the chessboard on the table. Hearing the disturbance, he lifted his silver-white eyes and nodded. "Ling Jiao, you've come." Fuxuan immediately bowed. The world only knew that Fuxuan possessed exceptional innate ability and had revitalized Chunyi Dao Gate. Very few knew that the one now in charge of Chunyi Dao Gate had not originally borne the surname Zi. After entering the sect, it was Taoist Master Yuansheng who personally bestowed his name, giving him the name Zi Lingjiao. Only before this old man did Fuxuan need no concealment. Joy lit his face as he hurriedly placed the jade box on the table and said with a bow, "Congratulations, Master." Taoist Master Yuansheng's expression slowly turned solemn. With a light flick of his finger, he opened the jade box, revealing the noble and mysterious spirit item within. He froze at once. The old man's eyes reddened, his voice hoarse as he said, "A profound supreme yin spirit item. Born from the waters of moonlight, grown in lands of supreme yin, a branch that wards off calamity, the profound supreme yin white laurel branch. How did you obtain it?" Fuxuan's eyes filled with tears as he nodded quietly. He watched as the old man seemed to lose his strength bit by bit and sink back into his seat. His voice choked. "It has been found. Kai Busey was the one who obtained it." Taoist Master Yuansheng lowered his gaze and let out a faint sigh. He muttered, "What does it matter that it's been found? How many years have already passed? This body of mine, aside from barely clinging to life beneath the Supreme Circuit Spirit Mirror, what use is it?" He slowly raised his hand and rested it lightly on the box. His expression deepened, and with a slight movement of his finger, the lid closed. The scattered white blossoms and golden laurel branch vanished from sight. Gradually, his emotions settled, returning to their former calm. Fuxuan said softly, urging him, "Master, please at least try." Taoist Master Yuansheng silently shook his head and said, This profound radiant illumination spans 16 steps from end to end, and not a single step may be taken beyond it. I have lingered here for 56 years. I no longer have any desire to strive to become a true monarch. This item can only be left to you. Fuxuan frowned, but Yuansheng solemnly continued. The ancestor once left an edict. He said that with the Supreme Yin sealed and spirit items cut off, he left us the profound method of seeking the Supreme Yin to pursue the true monarch. Back then, the ancestor used the white filament of harmonized radiance, but it failed. In truth, there are still 2 remaining. Fuxuan was startled and blurted out, "What?" He knew of the profound method of seeking the Supreme Yin. The Supreme Yin was a supreme and exalted fruition attainment. Ever since it ceased to manifest in the world, attaining it had become almost impossible. Now hardly anyone pursued it. Yet the confidence of Chunyi Dao Gate lay precisely in this secret technique of the Supreme Yang Dao lineage, the profound method of seeking the Supreme Yin. This art was an extremely profound secret technique. To secure a sliver of survival from the surplus position, it used spirit items of exceedingly high inherent rank, connected to that surplus position, to reinforce the practitioner in their attempt to break through to true monarch, resonating with the technique itself in hopes of achieving a better outcome. The founding ancestor of Chunyi Dao Gate, Jiquan, once encountered such an opportunity and obtained a strand of white filament of harmonized radiance, which he used in his breakthrough attempt. Thus Fuxuan was naturally stunned to hear of more strands remaining, confusion rising thick within him. Then why, Master? Chapter 1459, The Method of Seeking Dao II. Taoist Master Yuansheng said faintly, "You have not studied that secret technique, so you do not understand. Although the Supreme Yin Dao does not manifest, its calculations pointed to the existence of a surplus position that will re-emerge from obscurity, capable of accommodating later cultivators. Your ancestor once spoke to me of this. It is likely that some immortal, with a heaven-shaking divine ability, left behind a contingency, fixing that surplus position in place with a trace of profound light or a Dharma relic." Fuxuan found this entirely reasonable, but then saw a flash of resentment and pain appear on the old man's face as he spoke. But no matter how the ancestor calculated, he could not determine what that surplus position truly was. There is no need to say more. It must be that some true monarch used divine ability to obscure it, so that even spirits and gods could not discern it. We can only try. He shook his head with some pain as he continued. Why did the ancestor fail back then? I believe the surplus position corresponding to the white filament of harmonized radiance must have been fruitless. We stand too low to see clearly. Like mayflies gazing at the sun and moon, we think it a chance to attain the Tao. But from the vantage of the great powers above, that place may be a crucial point on the grand board, one that cannot be revealed to others. Fuxuan suddenly understood, his expression turning grave as he said, "So the remaining 2, you have kept them on the mountain all this time, never using them. And now this profound Supreme Yin spirit item is the one truly worth trying." Taoist Master Yuansheng sighed and said, "Exactly." With that, he pressed his hand on the jade box on the table and said softly, "Our Chunyi Dao lineage is destined to flourish. You are a genius rarely seen in 100 years and even more remarkable for having walked this path step by step amid the schemes of many factions. Now you are even able to shelter those who come after." Then Guanghu emerged, giving me a pillar to rely on. I did not expect Chehang to be even more outstanding. With the 2 of you, there is no need to waste this on me. Taoist Master Fuxuan sighed silently, but Yuansheng was now overjoyed. His gaze fell upon the jade box in his hands, his heart full of delight. He said, "The quality of this profound Supreme Yin white laurel branch is exceptional. It is likely something from the Wei era. I have heard that the Lady of Shiki obtained one before attaining the Tao. She refined it into talismans to dispel calamity and reduce karmic burden. Though we cannot use it in the same way, it shows just how precious this item is." "Indeed," Fuxuan said in a low voice, "I've had Chehang inquire further to find out which family owns that cave dwelling." At this point, Taoist Master Yuansheng's movements paused slightly, though his expression remained gentle and natural. In a barely audible voice, he said, "There's no need to ask." Taoist Master Fuxuan raised his brows slightly, then immediately lowered his head. "Yes." Silence lingered in the cave for a moment. Taoist Master Yuansheng shook his head and said, "As for what I promised Kai Buzi, that must be asked on his behalf. I will write a letter and inquire about Puyu's intentions. Back then, Yuansu and Zimu were closest to him, yet he is someone who keeps no close ties. No one would dare claim to be his intimate friend. Whether he comes will depend on both my standing and Kai Buzi's." Fuxuan bowed and withdrew quickly, leaving the old Taoist master sitting alone within the silver light. He stared at the jade box before him, his expression heavy, unable to speak for a long time. "Who sent this? That one of pristine water? Unlikely. His thoughts run deep and he keeps apart from worldly affairs. Aside from Suiguan, who could act on his behalf, thought Taoist master Yuansheng. Eastern Sea. Kai Buzi sped along without rest, traveling day and night outward from the eastern sea. As time, he did not head toward the outer reaches of the Peacock Sea, but instead followed the Shiki forward, descending into one of the most remote regions. Only after reaching the deep underground did he find a place devoid of spiritual energy, carve out a cave dwelling, and sit cross-legged in quiet reflection. Yuansheng is indeed still alive. Kai Wei was right. Profound radiant illumination stabilizes the six senses, gathers essence, evades detection, and avoids calamity. This old man must be one of the longest lived among cultivators. Though he cannot leave, he still has at least another decade. His gaze remained calm as he continued to calculate. Does the underworld's judiciary know that the Supreme Circuit Spirit Mirror is ownerless and no longer wielded by Jiquan? There is no way to hide it from them. I suspect they believe he can pursue metal, so they've come to an understanding with him. In any case, the mirror cannot sustain him for long. They might as well grant him some face. As for Pinglai, Kai Buzi's intent was no passing whim. Not only did he wish to meet Puyu, he also intended to make a trip to the Kwahai sect of Pinglai. According to my plan, once I abandon the pristine water Dao, I must seek a future life. Meeting Puyu is certain, but whether it succeeds or not, it is worthwhile either way. And if I can enter the Pinglai Grotto heaven, that would be even better. There was no other reason. Pinglai was an extremely special place. Pinglai is the Dao lineage of an immortal lord, the inheritance of immortal Lord Chufu. It bears lingering auspicious signs of immortality and must not be profaned. I have also heard that immortal Lord Chufu possessed great merit, and all Daos hold him in high regard. Its status is entirely different. Pinglai Grotto Heaven was one of the rare places in the world confirmed to be suppressed by an immortal artifact. Kai Buzi could not be certain, but he was already 80 to 90% sure. Once he set foot in the Pinglai Grotto Heaven, the threads of fate tied to him would grow 100-fold more complex and undergo a qualitative leap. Even if I remember nothing by then, it will still make the profound mysteries surrounding me harder to deduce. Reducing the risk even a little is worth it. Kai Buzi assumed the worst from beginning to end. If pristine water were injured, it might ignore him entirely and descend straight into pristine Cadence heaven. But for Kai Buzi, he only had one life. No level of caution was excessive. Beyond this, a greater worry was brewing in his heart. As time draws closer day by day, immortal merits grow harder to obtain. The day I can successfully exchange them becomes ever more distant. Kai Buzi had already spent all his previous immortal merits in exchange for guidance from a Dao lineage. To be honest, these few battles and schemes were nothing compared to the value of what he had received. He had never regretted it, but what ultimately limited him was time. Moreover, the risk of this matter kept rising as he slew demons and even killed several merciful ones, which only caused more tension. If I can obtain a technique this time, all the better. If not, what comes next will be far too dangerous. But even if I do obtain one, the method of seeking metal is worth hundreds or thousands of times more. How difficult will that be? He could only close his eyes and pray silently. This humble cultivator Kai Buzi respectfully invokes the Supreme Yin. As streaks of white light passed before his eyes, the sensation of weightlessness returned. Kai Buzi stepped forward into empty air. His vision brightened, and he appeared once more within that courtyard. Even after experiencing it many times, Kai Buzi still found it hard to comprehend. The higher his cultivation, the more he understood just how terrifying it was to be seized and transported across countless miles. The four white jade lamp pedestals appeared before him once again. The place remained unchanged, its bright light pure and luminous, as if as eternal as the grotto heaven itself. Kai Buzi paused slightly and found the courtyard empty. That stupid donkey is slacking off again. By now, Kai Buzi was quite familiar with the place and knew many things. Aside from the first time, when that donkey had been on duty for the first time and waited in advance, it had almost never been punctual since. So he stepped out from the central circular pool and waited quietly to the side. After only a moment, the courtyard gate creaked open. A young immortal official with pale green eyes pushed the door open and entered briskly as he called out, "Oh, Grand Taoist Master Kai has arrived." Chapter 1460, Dao Encouraging Yin Soul I. Snow fell thick and fast. The white-robed man leaned against the jade platform, a circular light screen flickering before him, displaying vast, heaven-piercing scenes within the great void. All manner of wonders were fu. Ellie reflected within the screen for him to see at a glance. Streams of golden radiance descended from above, circling his body and continuously merging into layer upon layer of brilliant light. Lu Jiangxian gently raised his hand, and a point of dazzling gold surged forth from his palm, shifting endlessly. Bright, radiant Yang Imperial Union essence. The mirror's power had already reached its limit, thus Li Xiaowei's breakthrough into divine ability did not bring much improvement in return. Though the world within expanded and mysterious light flickered, the greatest reaction came instead from the bright, radiant Yang Imperial Union essence before him. This bright Yang metallic essence gleamed brilliantly, surging with vitality as if stirred by something. It continued to rise, yet suppressed by the world within the mirror, it could not break free. It could only release its radiance in vain. More than 90% of this bright Yang metallic essence was left behind by Li Qianyuan. Lu Jiangxian was no longer the same person who had first obtained this item. His expression darkened as he understood what this metallic essence truly meant. If the metallic essence within the Sunseeker ring belonged to Li Qianyuan, then it was without doubt one of the Wei Emperor's contingencies. That this thing had fallen into his hands, and that the Li family was now regarded as the Wei Emperor's bloodline, all pointed to an extraordinary connection between the two sides. Lu Jiangxian remained silent. After an unknown span of time, he focused his gaze and looked into the mirror. The immeasurable great void lay dim and obscure. As he focused, the void gradually faded, revealing a vast expanse of yellow radiance stretching between heaven and earth, gleaming brilliantly. In the distance, a Dharma body sat in meditation. The body towered into the clouds, its entire form a deep earthy yellow. The lower half was embedded into the ground, rooted upon the earth veins. Behind it, rings of multicolored light spread outward like halos, vast as mountains, almost forming a barrier that separated heaven and earth. Boundless radiance flowed across its body like rolling winds and smoke, swirling at its sides. His eyes, obscured by layers of mist, were impossible to discern. Within his pupils lay a perfectly round darkness, devoid of any light, yet from it emerged 9 streams of colored radiance that spread across the land. This Dharma body sat cross-legged between heaven and earth, its form immense beyond measure. It sat upon the lower Luo plains, and the so-called 1,000-mile fertile expanse circled around its smooth belly. Its body leaned slightly forward, both hands placed before it on either side, one holding Timber Mountain, the other Mount Zaiyoshi. The place guarded by the cultivators, Mount Tangdao, lay right within his embrace. This Dharma body was both terrifying and strange, like a greedy child clutching half a watermelon, staring at it intently and unwilling to let go. From beginning to end, whether it was Kueki, Li Ziming, Tinglin, Cheheng, or Helian Wujiang, all the cultivators from north and south were fighting and casting spells beneath his palm and before his eyes. Lu Jiangxian watched carefully, not revealing himself within the great void as he calculated silently. It resembles a true monarch of earth virtue, yet not one of fruition attainment. It should be a surplus position of the majestic earth Tao. Within the majestic light Tao of Mount Yuaxia, there is a position of heavenly glow and one of majestic earth. There was no need to say more. This true monarch had descended from Mount Yuaxia and come specifically to Lower Luo. What is he doing? With a true monarch guarding the place, no matter how fierce the battle became, the spiritual energy in earth veins would remain unharmed. But why would a true monarch need to come in person for just that? I have no idea who he is waiting for. There is not a single flaw, thought Lu Jiangxian. He slowly withdrew his gaze and looked at the table before him. On the white jade-like platform lay a short sword entirely silver-white. Its hilt was around 3 centimeters. It rested quietly at his side as snow drifted down from above, landing upon the blade before quickly sliding off. For a long time, Lu Jiangxian had been unable to interact with the outside world, relying only on spirit items of the Supreme Yin lineage to exchange with it. Now, as the realm of sun and moon radiance grew richer, it meant he could truly create things beyond just Supreme Yin spirit items. The shamanic sword before him was the culmination of his shamanic arts and cultivation. This piece Kai Buzi must be preserved if possible. Whether he can be saved or not, I cannot expose myself. This sword is the key. Within the Supreme Yin Palace. The moment Kai Buzi heard that smug tone, he poured cold water over Dangjiang. He sighed, "So you are pleased, W. With yourself, there is still no news from above, yet the days keep closing in. You managed to send up a Buddhist cultivator this time. Where will you find the next one?" In the past, such scolding would birth anxiety, and Dangjiang would immediately lose his good mood, frowning and rambling in worry. But this time was completely different. He let out a cold laugh and replied, "Who do you think I am? You do the labor, I do the thinking. We are not on the same level. I have already taken care of everything." Oh, Kai Buzi was briefly delighted, but quickly suspected he was bluffing and asked with interest, "What do you mean?" Dangjiang laughed and replied, "Come with me. Immortal fairy Shehui instructed me long ago. Once you succeeded and ascended, I was to bring you to meet her. Good. Kai Buzi was instantly overjoyed. Other matters might be bluster, but something like meeting a superior could not be faked. He happily followed Dang Jiang out and saw the two maids at the palace entrance again. The one holding the pipa still held it. The maid who had carried a bamboo basket now held a jade tray instead. On it lay strands like white cotton, each about the length of a finger, emitting a faint glow. Having learned his lesson from the golden branch of laurel, Kai Buzi's eyes burned with desire. The sight made Dang Jiang's hair stand on end. He immediately grabbed Kai Buzi's sleeve and whispered, "You still have not paid off the last one."